And most of them found their feet, but it was, you befriend them, you have a carrot, you have a stick, and you make yourself their only way out, and that's how
Mm.
you do it. And so it's difficult because to do that kind of work, you actually have to be very empathetic because you have to know who they are and understand their motivations. But if you're very empathetic and you screw them over, it doesn't feel very nice either.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But we did that from the luxury side of things, consumer products. We did like pharmaceuticals, a lot of like, there was like a fake Viagra Cialis kind of counterfeiter we busted. And then, like idiots, we decided to each try one out of
Oh
curiosity.
no.
That was
Oh
really dumb
no.
of us. I almost went to a hospital because I was like, it's not supposed to last that long, right?
Oh
Uh,
fuck.
You're listening to the Art and More podcast with your hosts, Nathan and B.R. Nathan is a Canadian illustrator with a couple years of military experience, and B.R. is a British anarchist that moved to the States. Both are passionate shooters and community builders. Together, they run the CBRN art page. Enjoy the show.
All
Welcome
right.
back to the Art and More podcast.
Oh.
You said you're going to do the intro, but I'm going to jump ahead of you because it's kind of funny to me. I'm Nathan. I'm here with my co-host BR, and today we have what do we call you? Bond,
Alex.
James Bond,
Alex is fine. Yeah.
of Grayman and Co. Possibly the most interesting person that we randomly met at a basement mafia bar in Las Vegas at Shot Shop.
That's actually quite a high bar and does not make me comfortable as far as expectations management. But okay, we'll see what happens.
I don't know, man. We over the several hours you told us about running Cointel Pro things in foreign countries, and basically the most interesting stories I've heard in a very long time. So I've been looking forward to getting you back. Thank you again for coming on.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks, guys.
Yeah. I mean, like, we gotta give you credit. Like, we were listening to you rattle off like random stories, like people talking about when they used to work at Jimmy John's, and it's like, oh yeah, I was doing redacted in redacted with redact, and we're like, what the fuck? So we'll see what we can talk about. But so what's kind of your I mean, now obviously you're doing bespoke tailoring, kind of pursuing a true passion of yours. But how does one get from all of this intel work to bespoke tailoring? Like, what was that? What was that path for you?
Well, I think that generationally speaking, when I joined, wow, this is already hard, eh? Okay, so career-wise, when I first started doing what I was doing, there was not. This was in like the Fukuyama era, the end of history, and there was not a lot besides global war on terror that was out there. So if you wanted to work in, for instance, intelligence, you had to basically work in radicalization, counterterrorism, what have you, or you didn't really have a job because there wasn't a lot of peer-to-peer intelligence or counterintelligence stuff there. There was like a bit of it, but it was a pretty small pond unless you wanted to work, counterterrorism. So, kind of like you really start searching for meaning. And if you can't find meaning as a young man, you just find excitement. And so I just found the most exotic excitement I could. And it was not in North America. So Asia Pacific at that time, very burgeoning. I had the skills, background-wise, it made sense, and language-wise, etc. So I think in the mid to late 2000s to the early 2010s, that was probably the most interesting time to work in commercial intelligence, or at least corporate security related intelligence, threat intelligence, things of that nature in the commercial market. Probably the most interesting time or interesting milieu anywhere in the world in recent history, because they were not enforcing commercial security laws, intellectual property laws, or anything like that at that time. So it was really, it reminded me a lot of kind of 1920s, 1910s in the U.S. The stories of that, of like corporations running spies and assassins after each other and stuff. It was absolutely crazy. So that was a lot of fun. And then I went around a few different other regions, uh, hooked up to those firms that I was working for. Because in Hong Kong, for instance, you'll find a consulting firm that touches any region of the world. So I did that for a bit, and then I decided that, I met a lot of the people that I worked with in sub-Saharan Africa, and they were, contractors, what have you. But they were like much more what you would call like a mercenary, like in that aesthetically and otherwise, in that kind of they were more executive outcomes than they were WPPS, and they were just really pretty broken people, a lot of them. And I decided that I just I didn't want to end up that way in my 40s, late 40s, 50s. So I went back to the UK and I got a nice corporate job, still in this field, not quite as colorful, but still in that corporate security field. And surprise, surprise, in big consulting, you do get some really cool jobs every now and then, and they're certainly quite impactful on global economics, geopolitics, what have you. You're talking about sums of money that are, gigantic, hundreds of millions of dollars at points. And when you talk about investigating dispute resolution, for instance, or something like that. But the interesting work is always very short term, like crisis management, or anything along those lines. That's like a 5-day gig, maybe 2 weeks. And so in overall revenue for the firm, it's not going to make them that much, like in gross, even though the hourly is much higher. So what I would find is, you are doing 5 days of repatriating high value. And that's a lot of fun, and it's exciting, and it's kind of what you want to do. And then you are on a security transformation project for a giant company, and your job essentially is to ensure that people are using complicated, complex passwords, strong passwords and stuff like that. And it's like, oh my God, I'm doing that for a month and a half. So eventually, at that time, I was living very close to Savile Row, and I kind of started, like a frustrated cat, just like clawing at something. I ended up just walking through Savile Row constantly, and I went to Gideon Hawk and Henry Poole and Co., and I met David Taube there, and a lot of these tailors, and it's actually quite familial in that industry on Savile Row. They all know each other, they love each other, they hate each other, they work together, they work against each other. And watching them work was fascinating, so I got really into tailoring. And
do you mind for the less sophisticated amongst our listenership?
Yes.
Do you mind explaining Savile Row to the uninitiated?
Yes.
Yeah, so Savile Row, the original tailoring district globally. In Japan, a suit, I believe, is called saburu as a result. And so yeah, Savile Row is it's where tailoring really came from. And if you watch Kingsman, like that's where the shop is located. It's in Mayfair, right next to Soho, like Piccadilly Circus area. It's quite a pilgrimage when you go there. But then you go there and you do also realize, like, wow, this is like a very intimate kind of a thing. Because usually you go to somewhere that there's a pilgrimage and you're blown away by how gargantuan and monolithic whatever you're going to is. But this one is still it's small. The shops are small. They're very humble in a lot of ways, but they're very elegant. And that's where you'll find the best tailoring on earth. Now, the tailoring is very traditional tailoring. So everything is still done, there are so many efficiencies these days in making a tailored suit that can bring down the man hours and the cost and all this stuff. And Savile Row tailors do not do any of those things. So watching them work is quite a meditative experience.
It's so interesting to hear you talk about, like, oh yeah, we're in sub-Saharan Africa and Asia doing all this stuff, and things were exciting, mercenaries, and like you can't, like, in your telling of this, you somewhat like breeze through what a lot of people would be like, holy shit, that's interesting. You're like, but let me tell you about the bespoke suits on Savile Row in London. Like, now we're fucking talking about something exciting.
Yeah.
I love that.
I mean, there's a juxtaposition that was in my 20s that was very, I really got off on it. I really had a lot of fun with it because I lived in London, and I would hop off to gigs in places that are a lot more austere, or at least exotic, and that was a lot of fun because it felt like I was in a film. It felt like it, because that's what James
Right.
Bond does, right? He
It
experiences the
sounded like it
refinement, and then
when you were giving us stories in the car, like in the car ride in Vegas, we're like, oh my god, it sounds like stuff out of a film, and that's kind of what
like
every
it's
young man
Jack
wants is
Harlow.
like, like I think every young man wishes they could have those kind of adventures, but so few get the
Actually
chance
do.
to live it. Yeah.
So the first thing I would say is everybody needs to live for at least a couple years in London, or maybe Paris. And the reason is because it gives you access to like all of Europe. It becomes very cheap to fly. So we would just take weekends in Barcelona, or we go down to Monaco for the Grand Prix. And for a lot of people, going to like the Monaco Grand Prix is kind of like a once in a lifetime thing. But we just went every year. It was really easy, and we learned all these little travel hacks to do it relatively cheaply. So we would pack our tuxes, and then I remember for the first couple of years, before we started making serious money, we would go and we would pack our tuxes, and then we stay in a hostel in Nice with our tuxes, and then we'd take the train into Monaco. But then you would do that, and then you'd go back to London. The next day, you'd be off on a job for a mining company in, let's say, Central African Republic or something like that, Ouagadougou, Burkina Faso, etc. A place like that. And so, yeah, that juxtaposition, especially when you're in London, and London has such like majestic old world charm, especially if you get into those circles. The most iconic for me was I remember seeing the officers' mess at an armored unit, like what you would call like armored cavalry, but we don't call it that in Canada. And it's nice, it's more or less what you expect. And then you go to the Cav Guards Club in London, and everything is made out of solid marble, like the entire like building almost, and everything is covered in gold. And Bollinger champagne is free flow, and all this other stuff. And it really changes your perspective on kind of the extremes, right? Because when you have that extreme amount of opulence, and then the next week you're heading off to Harare or something, and you're seeing extreme austere environments and poverty and what have you, it really does make you experience the highs and the lows, and appreciate both of those even more.
Yeah.
You almost tell Britain used to be an empire.
Yeah, I heard that,
No, I'm just looking back in the last time I was in England, and I just remember everything kind of smelling.
Yeah, there is that.
This was downtown.
Yeah, Soho.
Yeah,
That'll do it.
I love that that comment on London and that old world charm, because like there's so few places that are such crossroads of the world. And while I of course have many problems with Britain and it's how it's ruled, like London is one of my favorite cities on earth, and I fucking despise cities, but London is so fascinating with just, I mean, there's ancient Roman roads beneath the roads that you're, traveling on. It's like the city's like 1,000+ years old. It's just, there's so much to it, and there's like every part of the world has some kind of foothold somewhere in London, and same with the cultures and all that kind of thing. But it's to have that as kind of your base of operations while you're globe hopping, that's a hell of a way to do it.
Yeah, that's pretty freaking cool.
The intelligence side of it is fascinating. The intrigue, the espionage, the diplomacy, whatever, of London is I went to a pretty elite British university, and in my class we had obviously a Saudi and Emirati royalty. We had Russian oligarchs. We had so if this, I'm trying to figure out how to, because you could very easily figure this out. We had like the sons of freedom fighters and terrorists and all sorts of stuff. And you'd be going to clubs with these people, and they'd be having what they call like bottle races, where they would be trying to buy more bottles of champagne. I remember I was at a club called Movida in, I think it's like Oxford Circus or Mayfair area, and I remember I was with a Russian guy who was buying bottles, and then across was a guy from same school, Saudi guy, and they were buying so many bottles, and we just could not drink these things. It was to the point where staff were bringing out like cases of them, like still in the cardboard boxes, and they were just stacking them. And it was just like a race, basically, to see who would end up spending more. And they don't have an off license, so it's not like we could, because we were like, whatever, we'll just take them back to the halls, like the residents. And they're like, no, you can't do that. We're like, this is like, 50,000 pounds worth of, champagne,
God.
and we can't take it back. It was like, no, sorry, that's it. Yeah.
Oh God, what the fuck?
And then so just
the hyper rich opulence there.
That's the height of it, and it's interesting because obviously all of those. I get questions from friends often about their little brothers or their cousins or whatever, and they have the choice between, say, Georgetown. I mean, Georgetown's pretty good, but like Georgetown and Oxford or London School of Economics or whatever, or even Harvard. I mean, Harvard's a little bit different, but for me, the elite British schools are just more international, and I think the networking is more valuable if you are an international person. Being Canadian, the feeder to Canadian government, federal service, so therefore Canadian intelligence is Carleton, really. But my God, I mean, you're really restricting your network to such a small segment when, at some point, if you need help in Abu Dhabi or in Bahrain or wherever it is, you can really find it through that network that you make in London. And you don't even have to go to an elite university in the UK. You can make those connections just by more or less existing in London, as long as you go to some interesting places.
Yeah, you just have to. That's the interesting thing about Britain. Like, I don't know much about the higher end. Like, I would go out and I would rub shoulders with like Cambridge snobs who would burn like £50 notes in front of homeless people as like initiations into their fucking little secret societies. There's some pretty fucked up stuff out there, dude. But
I have a little bit of disdain for the ultra rich. Like I hear about a little bit of this, and not everyone naturally, but shit like that grinds my gears.
As you should.
It's something that you really notice in Britain and a lot of the rest of Europe that isn't quite as apparent in North America, because North America has a lot of new money, and so you'll have people who's like, dads were maybe like a successful car dealership owner, and then their kids making like tens of millions doing whatever. But like Britain, there is just such a stark divide in between like people who are just slumming it and people who are crushing it, and the middle class is like pretty fucking thin. And there's like people are very class aware in Britain. So the various drinking cultures, like when we saw the Cambridge kids come out to like clubs in their tuxedos and like
from Mayball, yeah.
Girls in their fucking like ball gowns in clubs where like we're wearing the rattiest shit imaginable with like stains all over and all sorts of just being trashy assholes. And we see those kind of kids and it's like, man, we just live in different worlds, don't we? And like,
I love that song, Common People. William Shatner did like a cover of it, which I thought was excellent. But that's the whole theme is there's this in the song there is this elite from landed gentry, etc. girl, and she's slumming it with a rock star, and she's like, show me what it's like to be poor. Show me what it's like,
It
and
sucks.
That's the whole song.
No, it's fascinating how like I feel like a lot of Americans don't really get that kind of experience of when like sure there's rich guys and blue collar guys and all that, but it is so fucking stark in Europe. Like you're saying, like bottle races and crazy shit like that, where people are effectively just burning money. And then like there's pub culture. Like, were you being in those kind of circles with a lot of those international types? Were you exposed to much of pub culture, or was it more kind of like the higher?
Well, there was definitely. I think pub culture pervades classes now, and especially with international people. There is, post-colonial, like if you come from, the Gulf, if you come from India especially, there is kind of almost a competition to see who understand British culture and especially pub culture more thoroughly, right? Because if you're an Indian and you through and through understand all like the graces and all of the etiquette of like British pub culture, whatever, it means that like you're somebody in India, right? So we definitely went to pubs a lot. And you would find in the evening, gosh, the more I talk about it, the more I miss London, because you'd start off at the pub at what, like 5 or
Oh,
so?
of course. Yeah.
And then you would have like 5 gins or something like that. And then you would end up having dinner, like drunkenly, either like maybe you depending on who you're with, you'd go somewhere nice, but you're already half wasted at that point. Then you'll go to like a proper bar or club, like in Shoreditch or maybe in Mayfair, depending on like the crowd you're with, and then you end up drunk on the Thames at like Victoria Embankment, like drinking some, I don't know, Smirnoff Ice you bought at an off license.
Yes.
And then somebody falls in, and now the sun is rising because now it's like 4 o'clock in the morning and it's the summer, so the sun rises over Waterloo, etc. It's gorgeous.
No, it is quite a culture.
That sounds like I don't know about you guys, but it sounds like basically the Judeo-Christian version of hell. What hell would be like for me.
There is a nightclub right next to MI6 called Fire.
You've already lost me as soon as you said the word nightclub.
It's called Fire, and it's I think it used to be a gay club, and I don't think it is anymore. But I've heard so many stories of some MI6 guys back in the day, young ones, who would literally get off work and they just go to Fire, and then they would go straight from Fire back to work at Vauxhall.
Jesus. But Christ, that sounds terrible. Maybe I'm just too old. I'm too old to understand all.
It's one of those nightclubs that's built into like an old. I don't think it's a bomb shelter, but it's like semi-underground. The ones that like built into the bridges.
Yeah. There's lots of like old because obviously London being such an old city, like property value is just fucking insane. So like any little bit under a bridge that can be like enclosed and turned into commercial property absolutely will be. And there's such a love for the like heavy industrial vibe a lot of those places give off, that those places, they always get turned into some like high-end club, and it's like homeless people used to like piss and shit down here, but
still do.
Still do. You're making me miss London. It's been like 5. That was the last when I was leaving England. My last few days in England I spent in London before flying out, and I was like, man, this country is a little bit of a shithole, but London will always have my heart to a degree. It's just a fascinating place.
Yeah, like I'd never want to live in England. Just like any of those weird kind of authoritarian Western countries. I guess that we're all in one to some degree, but yeah, like London. I don't have fond memories of London. I won't deny that there's like a lot of cool culture and history and all of that, but I have better things to do, I think, than being stabbed by a gang of teenagers with machetes. That's a joke.
It's only kind of a joke.
It's a half
all the way
joke.
in Mayfair these days. My buddy runs a security company that does motorcycle security, as in
Well, how does security in London even work? It's like, do you just do you hand them a note nicely and tell them to like leave you alone and stop stabbing you?
So increasingly, security firms are getting away with more and more because the threats are escalating. But it used to be absolutely just observe and report. But London especially is very interesting because, like you said, you have a very onerous legal infrastructure around self-defense and around security that makes it very difficult to work inside of those constraints. But you also have some of the most powerful and wealthy people on earth who need very robust security that have a lot of capabilities. Yeah. So what you'll find is that
rules for thee and not for me kind of deal. Rules for thee and not for me
more
kind
or less,
of deal.
Yeah. Because when you look at Scotland Yard, they are very sensitive to these things. And when the war, when Russia invaded Ukraine, there was an enormous increase in the tempo of assassinations of Russian oligarchs. and Ukrainian oligarchs. And a friend of mine told me, oh, it's gone up by X percentage. And I'm like, what do you mean it's gone up by X percentage? That suggests that you guys have data on all these other assassinations. And it's like, yeah. So, they know when somebody has been assassinated, they know that, most people don't get pianos to fall on people, and people usually don't drown in kiddie pools, kind of thing. And it happens so often there, and there is that kind of shadow war, and that sounds like such a melodramatic way to say it.
No, but it's a real thing. Like for years, I mean, one of the most famous ones was the radiation poisoning of I guess he was like a former,
but those ones are super high profile.
They are, and just obviously those dominating the headlines, and Russia acting so incredulously about well, we had nothing to do with it. It's like, oh yeah, just like your little green men. Like, seriously, dude? Of course you fucking assassinated the guy. But if that happened
pre-war.
Oh yeah, yeah.
The corporate side is crazy.
If they were operating in the same way in the US that they do in England, things would be escalated to such a higher degree. But for whatever reason, even though the UK is meant to be, a pretty powerful partner within NATO and, Western ally, they seem to act a lot more bravely in that region, just for whatever reason. Did you have any involvement? And don't answer if you don't answer if you can't. But did you ever have to deal with any of Russian involvement, either corporate or state actions within?
If Europe? You work in a big corporate consulting firm in the UK, in London, particularly in the city, you will have to deal with Russian entities 100%, because so much of Russian finance is in the city. It's in London. Specifically, there's so much Russian investment there, and we're not just talking about real estate at Knightsbridge or whatever in South Ken. There's so much commercial investment and institutional investment there, and that's kind of what I was talking about. Even pre-war, sure, political dissidents are very high profile, but what you don't hear about, which happened pre-war, it was happening monthly, is the nephew of the president of a uranium-related or a uranium-adjacent hedge fund in Moscow. He would be living in Islington or not, but probably not. He'd probably be in the West End somewhere. And he just, one day trips and smashes his head against, something in his garage and dies.
These things happen.
That would happen monthly. So, and then, or even more often than monthly. And when the war kicked off, that obviously accelerated by, a factor of 5 or 6 or something like that. But it was already an existing, GRU guys and former GRU, former FSB guys who now work for Alpha Bank or whatever the hell. London's been their playground for a long time. Same thing with, the Gulf.
Yeah.
BR here with a quick word from our newest sponsor of the show that made our first video podcast possible, the great people over at Attorneys for Freedom. Attorneys for Freedom are a real criminal defense law firm offering attorneys on retainer for legal representation in self-defense cases, and are not some insurance company or provider. This means that Attorneys for Freedom are able to cover scenarios that are often denied coverage by other programs. Self-defense scenarios such as while in gun-free zones or sensitive areas, while under the influence or on medication, scenarios where you knew your attacker, and while using any weapon in self-defense, from a firearm to a household object or otherwise. Additionally, Attorneys for Freedom will not drop you from coverage, nor will they ever ask you to pay them back. Even if you take a plea deal where you admit guilt to a criminal act, Attorneys for Freedom will not ask to recoup their fees. Attorneys for Freedom covers 100% of your attorney's fees in the event they can reasonably argue that you were acting in self-defense, and now you're facing serious felony charges. The primary key to coverage is their ability to reasonably argue self-defense in court. Nathan and I have signed up already, and you can too in no time at all. The National Self-Protection Plan is available with a one-time sign-up fee of $100 and just $35 per month after that. Family plans and annual rates are also available. Signing up via the link in the show notes or via the CBRN Instagram bio link helps support the show with both your initial sign-up and every month you retain Attorneys for Freedom services. Get covered in all 50 states, support the show, and have peace of mind that should your worst day come, Attorneys for Freedom has your back. Thanks for listening, people. How's it going, lads and ladies? BR here with a quick word from the longest running sponsor of the Art and War podcast, Advanced Warfighting Solutions. AWS have been making tough as hell gear for decades right here in the US in North Carolina. Nathan, myself, and thousands of others run that gear through the ringer and trust our lives to it, whether that's LARPing in the woods or dragging kit through war zones. AWS manufactures many great packs, pouches, plate carriers, and our personal favorite, the SMU Operator Belt. A set and forget gun belt that crushes in build quality, capability, and excellent feedback from its many users. We are tough on our gear here at Art and War, and the SMU takes that treatment in its stride. Though already at a sweet price point, you can knock $10 more off your SMU belt with the code ARTandWar10 at awsin.com. The code and link to the AWS website can be found in the show description. Thanks for listening, now let's get back to the show.
When we say when the war kicked off, are we talking like 2014 or 2022?
2022.
Okay, gotcha.
Not the actual start of the war.
Yeah. No, it's interesting. Like one of my best friend's roommate in uni in the UK was the son of some Russian oligarch who, you know, they'd been kicked out of Russia, and there would always be allusions to like, yeah, you know, we can't go back there, and kind of like, well, you know, don't mention that I'm Russian so loud, and like very just fucking sketchy. Any kind of conversation about any of that would be like, hey, let's you know, let's not discuss that. It's like, okay, I got like little glimpses of that as just a teenager, but you know, having grown up now and seen kind of all of the like fingers in many pies in Britain, like, why do you think the UK? Well, yeah, if you know, like, why is the UK so ransacked by like Russians? Why not anywhere else in Europe? I mean, I know it's plenty of other places, but the UK seems to be a particular favorite of theirs.
Well, I mean, it's not just Russia. I mean, you go to China, same thing with the Chinese emigre. I mean, obviously for them, Sydney's big, Toronto, Vancouver are big, but London is just, it is the intersection of the world, historically and geographically. And so you'll have people from every continent on Earth, they all have a toe in London. So for Russia, I think that it was just due to, when you look at where the money was, and this is speculative, so maybe you want to talk to Justin at Spycraft 101 or something about this just to validate it. But what would make sense is that, you know, with the fall of the Berlin Wall, who had money? It was all KGB guys, all government-related guys, and they had relationships with MI6 and, you know, British guys, and they had probably relationships with, you know, to a degree, you know, Mossad and CIA and DSGI or whatever. But MI6 had a very different kind of relationship with KGB and the alumni of KGB, I should say, than CIA would, for instance. So it was probably very inviting for these former KGB guys who now have a lot of money to be like, oh, well, you know what, I have friends who can help me. I have, you know, I already kind of, I've been talking to this, you know, my British counterpart, my frenemy or whatever it is, for a while, and I've kind of romanticized where he comes from and stuff like that. And also, there's this idea of Europe, whereas I think that, you know, in the Cold War, there's a sense that America is the enemy, and it is so alien to us as Soviets in their way of life. But Europe is a historical arena that we are in, rather than an enemy. So the UK probably feels a bit more inviting like that too. And so I guess, you know, it's the same thing that you get with Toronto or Vancouver with Chinese diaspora, and especially people from Hong Kong back in '99, is that once you get a few in there who are like, oh, this is great, I'm going to tell my friends to come. And that's basically what you got with London also. And I think that there was a lot of prestige around London, because if you went to Sandhurst, for instance, in, let's say, the late 2000s, early 2010s, it was filled with Gulf and Jordanian and what have you officers who were there as kind of part of a diplomatic gesture, that, you know, you could have Prince so-and-so go to Sandhurst and graduate and serve in the Cav Guards for a bit or whatever it is. So there was definitely that aspirational element for the middle class, like the upper middle class in those countries.
Yeah, that's it. It's funny you bring up Sandhurst. I was there. I won't pull out exactly when, but like the mid 2010s, and what like obviously I don't know how much you know about my background, but I bailed on that shit because it was so aggressively not my place. Because I was very interested in going into the military and doing the whole, kind of a similar vibe of like, adventurism and wanting to go out there and do all of that kind of shit. And it Sandhurst was such an interesting place because it is just a bunch of people who want prestige, and it's a bunch of people who it's a bunch of posh boys, really, which does not suit me at all. I am like a country hick, and
Yeah.
like it's fascinating how many people are basically just going there to get their years in, and then like, oh, and then I'll have a job at daddy's company, or like like doing whatever it is. It's so
Yeah, you've talked about
so
these
interesting,
people.
dude. Like there was a major there who looked like the Monopoly man, complete with complete with mustache and a monocle. I shit you fucking not. It is a cartoonish, like, unreal place. And
To this day, even in tailoring, there's, if you want certain kinds of embellishments or certain kinds of tailoring trim, there's only one place in the world you get it. It's Eden Ravenscroft, or maybe Given Hawk, or one of it's London, because they still have a culture where, in the US, I forgot what you guys call them. You don't call them DEUs, but well, I mean,
you're talking to a Brit and a Canadian, so I don't know what we fucking call them.
You guys haven't assimilated enough yet, I guess.
No.
But yeah, I think dress uniform, you kind of have to get it, but people don't really take a tremendous amount of identity from their dress uniform. But like, man, you go in the UK, officers, they spend a lot of money getting their blues or their dress uniform, their mess kit properly done, and you still have like that cottage. It's not even a cottage industry, but it's that very dedicated industry, generation upon generation of people who will like hand enamel the gold buttons.
Yep.
And you will not find that product at that quality level anywhere else in the world. You can't go, if you go to China and you want to get it mass manufactured, they don't have the process. And there's only one place in the world, and that's London, because there's still a demand for it there.
It's really fascinating seeing that stark contrast between, like, I guess the upper class of the military. It's always going to be the officer corps, like in the UK compared to, say, America. Like, sure, officers in essentially any military will always be the ones with more money, but like the American officer versus the British officer, there is such a stark difference in the mentality and kind of how they hold themselves, and what it means to have that prestige. Like an American officer, if they're not a fucking dickhead, will generally be like a cool guy who makes a bit more money and is probably a bit more educated, and that's kind of the end of it. Like maybe they come from like a upper middle class family, that kind of thing.
Canada's similar.
Yeah, like it's never really like upper class. Like very
nice.
No, it's
Yeah.
it's never like the prestige, the creme of the crop kids who are like, oh, I want to become an officer and then go into daddy's company. It's never that.
So I mean, that Cav Guards story, is kind of a microcosm of that, right? Because when you join armor in Canada or in the US, you do it because you think tanks are cool.
Fuck yeah.
Right? But in the UK, if you're cavalry, that says something about you socioeconomically.
Yep.
So it's a very different, like, aspirational thing. I still remember in Mayfair on Davy Street, they have an infantry regiment, which I always think is hilarious because it's Davy Street. And I remember, I think he was like a lance or something like that, and he was getting out of his chauffeured Jaguar XJ. that moment for his, oh man. Well, he's a lance because he hasn't gone to university yet. He just got out of Like, gosh, what are your versions of the cadets? Territorial, not even territorial. CCF.
Yeah. They're we just call them cadets, like Royal Cadets.
Yeah, so he probably just got out of the freaking cadet corps, and he hasn't gone to uni yet, and that's why he's not an officer cadet yet. But yeah, that was a moment for me, and that's something that I don't think you'll find that in North America or in really any other Western country. Maybe France.
Maybe, yeah. Places with like where the military, like basically how it operates in the organization hasn't changed for like 400 plus years. Like,
Yeah.
you see some very silly shit in terms of like feathers and decor in the various regiments. Like the history of the various units are so old that like from the outside you're like, why the fuck are those guys dressed like that? And it's like they've been doing it for like centuries compared to US or Canadian kind of units. And with that you just get a very different kind of people. And like not to ramble on about me, but like going into it was such a stark contrast compared to what I was used to. Like my dad was not an officer. He was in the military. He's just a regular line guy enlisted, and you don't encounter people like that trying to become an officer in Britain. Like they are all their dad was an officer and then he went on to be a CEO or whatever the fuck. It's all like everyone is from a certain class level, and anyone who's not from that, it's just like it's such a different reaction you get from people because in the military, especially as you're going through all that office stuff, people are trying to network. They're trying to like they've been used to doing at university. They're trying to make connections for down the line, like powerful people, and they talk to someone like me. It's like I'm common as muck, mate. Like I'm normal, dude. I shot rabbits growing up for pocket money, and they're like, "What the fuck are you?"
You shot rabbits? You were allowed to do that legally in the UK?
I told you I'm a country bumpkin, dude. Like I had a little suppressed 22. You can't have semi-auto anything above 22 in the UK, but without very special licensing. Did you
can have suppressors?
Yeah, because it's polite. That's the weird thing about Britain. It's as hard to get a suppressor as it is to get a firearm. So once you get a firearm, they're like, please do that quietly. It's like one of the only things that makes sense about the firearm laws. But did you have I don't know if your position in your job, did you have any like access to firearms within your roles as security? Like what did that look like for you in the UK?
It's a complicated answer, but I'll put it this way. We would train in Switzerland.
That sounds efficient.
So, I didn't get hands-on that much. I mean, by the time I was in London, I was doing a very corporate job, but, you do miss it, some sugar time every now and then. So, if you can go to Switzerland and pull some sugars and spend company professional development money to do so, you'll do it. And Switzerland has amazing facilities, absolutely amazing facilities with robotic targets and all this other stuff. So we had a really good time with that. I actually find that all the different BBC dramas, whether espionage dramas or like the murder dramas, like I think they have like Slow Horses lately with Gary Oldman, and then they had a series called Bodyguard.
That was fucking good.
Yeah, and Idris Elba, Luther. Like, I think those are actually a very authentic
really
way to look at how firearms exist in and also like organized crime and intelligence and espionage in London, to be very honest. I mean, is it realistic? No. But does it feel authentic? It does. And I think it's a decent portrayal of the dynamic of firearms and how firearms are used, right? Because it is much harder to access in the UK.
Shame.
Yeah, so, you don't get, it's harder to get, a decent one. I mean, I remember there was that terror attack, and the guy had like an 80-year-old single-action Dutch revolver, and then all the firearms historian, and he fired it once, and the whole thing just blew up in his hand at like, God, what was it at, Notting Hill Carnival or something like that many, many years ago. And all the firearms historians were like crying because they're like, oh my God, they blew up that gun. But yeah, so in when you watch these BBC dramas, I think that is a pretty authentic portrayal of, like it exists, it's there. There's different paperwork hoops you have to jump through and what have you, but it's very, very difficult.
Yeah, so there was like absolutely zero chance for you to have like basically a firearm on your person. Like, would you be issued a firearm in any kind of UK based jobs, or was it just like only outside the country?
So there are a couple sectors in which private sector can have an authorization to carry a firearm. We're looking at things like manned guarding for government facilities, nuclear sector, so DEC, Department of Energy Climate Change, UK Parliament building, for instance, at one point was privatized security. A bunch of different government buildings at one point, and so those were private security guards carrying firearms. And so there are, from a regulatory perspective, some ways you can shape that so that aesthetically it's not just a guy, with wearing a uniform and doing static security, but now you're kind of getting into, I'll put it this way, I think the SIA would be really upset if people were discussing all the different ways that the regulations could be shaped.
So it's effectively just like bending the rules as necessary to get the job done, or like working within the box, kind of.
It's also risk calculus, right? Because the worry that everyone has, whether you're private sector or you're public sector, if you're a regulator, if you're a guard, if you're the owner of a guard company, if you're a manager, what have you, like, sure, maybe you can kind of justify, go through the gatekeepers, and your guard can carry a gun for whatever reason. If he ever uses it,
oh
my God, the blowback will be all the way up and down the chain. The second the Guardian or something runs a story about like the guy who shot that guy was not a police officer, suddenly everyone in the industry gets crucified. So there's a bit of a professional courtesy and etiquette situation where it's like you don't really take the piss too hard in that sector in the UK.
Yeah, it's like somewhat security theater, unless like everything is going to absolute shit kind of deal.
Yeah, I mean, I'm curious with the way the world is going now. I'd be curious to see, what the UK would look like if, and I don't think it's possible geopolitically anymore, but if there was a case of continental level warfare and how the aesthetics of firearms in society would change in the UK, or if they wouldn't,
I guarantee, like, I would, I'll eat my hat if this does not turn out the way I'm about to say, but like, if the UK got invaded in the same way that Ukraine did, and then instantly it's like, okay, just like empty the armories, give the civilians rifles, like, we gotta reactivate Dad's army. Like, that shit will never happen in the UK ever again.
No,
like,
fuck no. when you kill gun culture, it's dead.
It doesn't come back. Yeah,
yeah. Which I think there's a very like I want to say deliberate steps have been made to do that in the UK. It's not coming back, no matter what, even if they wanted it to.
Oh, there could be Russian paratroopers falling from the sky, and the UK government would be like, "All right, take shelter. Like, we'll handle it." Yeah, literally, that would be the fucking attitude. They would not give them even an inkling of like, "Hey, we'll equip you guys so you can defend yourselves." No, their attitude would be like, "We'll look after you, and if we don't, spasibo. It's been nice knowing you."
Yeah, I mean, urbanite gun culture in Canada is similar to a lot of gun owners I know in the UK, where it's such a small and almost secret niche hobby.
Yeah.
That within the niche, people are very vibrant, but nobody talks about it outside of that community. And you always feel like you are if you say the wrong thing, suddenly there's going to be like a newspaper article that just destroys your gun club, and then all the licenses and permits get taken away, and you somehow destroyed the gun culture, the gun community for that entire geography.
Yeah.
I mean, Nathan wouldn't know anything about being an underground kind of dude in Canada, but
I have no idea. Why would I ever like guns in Canada? That'd be awful. But
since
no,
I've
it's
left,
like-
however,
Since it is very difficult to get away with that stuff in Canada. Like it's kind of an open secret that no one really, like, most people don't really follow the rules. But that being said, it's not like it is here. It absolutely isn't. And you're right. Like here, the idea of like throwing my rifle and with a suppressor and a light and laser, all of that in the back of my truck while waving at the neighbors, totally okay. Would not fly in Nova Scotia.
SWAT team response within 20 minutes.
Oh, 100%. That's like one of the few things that police will actually show up for. But it's disappointing. I want to say it's very disappointing. One of my big pet peeves is when like authoritarian shithead Western governments try and stamp on gun culture because the greater good. But either way, that's not what this episode's about. I harp on about this enough.
I could go on this for a while. I have a lot of urban liberal friends, and after a couple drinks, if somebody brings up, anything that touches on this topic at all, my other friends just shoot them dagger eyes because, like, oh no, now you're gonna get Alex started about how stupid this all is. Because I'm a public safety expert. I went to school for it. I've studied it. I've run security for like major global events. I have a lot of qualifications in it. So it drives them nuts because my fundamental argument is I don't even get into the constitutionality of it or whatever because we're in Canada, so that's not an argument in Canada.
Yeah.
But from a public safety perspective, it doesn't make sense. And you can, even though it's very counterintuitive, because intuitively it makes sense, but gun control actually, especially in Canada, really does not make any sense. It will have such a minuscule impact on safety, public safety. And people just don't like hearing that because it's not it's an aesthetic thing. It's a value aesthetic. It's a philosophical aesthetic. They want a society without guns because they associate guns with violence, because their first exposure with a gun was watching, Bruce Willis shoot someone in the face instead of shooting a 22, on a black circle or whatever. So they have that association, and they've had it since they were children, and that'll be it for their entire life. So it's an aesthetic thing. And when you actually start looking at politics as an aesthetic thing rather than a rational thing or even a properly ideological thing, the world makes a lot more sense.
Yeah. It's unfortunate.
It's so easy. There is like such a contrast between what so many of these people support, like, not to sound like typical Rush Limbaugh, but like these people will have like a Ukrainian flag in their bio and they're like rooting for them in this war, and then they're like, but civilians under no circumstances should have assault rifles. It's like a single historic day could have you rooting for the civilians and hoping they get their hands on those assault rifles. I just don't
Taiwan is fascinating in that regard. Absolutely fascinating. Yeah, I mean, Ukraine was, I did absolutely see the impact of what, like, just handing an 18-year-old an AK, that I had some pretty scary moments. I was there immediately upon, or within a couple weeks of the invasion in 2022, and I did see, a month, and I did see kind of the impact of when you have a population that isn't necessarily well trained in firearms, and you just give them firearms, it's dangerous, man.
Well, yeah, like they've got no kind of like martial firearm culture at all. Like before the war, target shooting was probably as niche as it is, maybe a little less so. I don't know Ukraine, but it was probably about as prevalent as it is anywhere else in Europe, where it's like a very
they had guns. It just wasn't there wasn't like a training culture or anything like that. Like you had hunting clubs, and maybe your uncle had like, some rifles that you'd go out and shoot. It's, similar to in a lot of Europe. But yeah, they just started handing, and then and then they started telling all these people like, oh, there's like saboteurs everywhere, like watch out because there's Spetsnaz, wearing plain clothes, everywhere. And he was giving this guy, an AK and being like, you protect your city against
Like-
anything that looks strange. It's like,
Great.
Yeah, I look strange is the short story there.
Do you? I mean, the short. There's the short story, but are you able to share any of the longer stories you shared with us about the Ukraine trip?
Yeah.
Probably some. I can tell you about the time that we almost carjacked a guy by mistake.
How the fuck did that happen?
Did I tell you? I didn't tell you guys I want a shot, eh?
You told us about moving some stuff, but
that was probably the most lighthearted. This is the most lighthearted story that I can pull out of my 2 months at the start of that war, because it's a lot of very sad stories. But we almost just like carjacked a guy completely by accident. So we were in Poland and we called for a car rental. It's a company called Panek, and like Panek. And it was a white hatchback. There was two of us at the time. We had a bunch of gear. We had like basically a pelly each. And it had all of our, it had our we prepared for potentially austere environments, and then we got there and like, oh yeah, I forgot this is like a first world country, and it's in Europe, and we're staying at 4-star hotels. But we had like sleep rolls, and we had NBC kits, so we had like gas masks and stuff, because who knows what the Russians might do, etc. So we had these kits, and we're like, okay, well, so we need a hatchback. We're not a big one because we're in Europe, but we'll get this white Opel hatchback. And so we rented it on the app, and then the app sends us a notification. It's like, okay, meet us, pick up your car at this place. And we went there, and it was a parking lot outside of a movie theater, like a cinema. And we're like, okay, it's kind of weird, but whatever, different companies do things in different ways. So we just were like, it said like, our representative will deliver the car to you at this location. So we're waiting there, and they're late. So we're like, okay, well, they're late, but maybe this is normal. It's Poland. Like, who knows what the punctuality standards are here compared to what we're used to. I mean, if they were late in Canada or the US, we wouldn't be that surprised either. And we're chilling there, and we're not exactly high vis, but we're also not being covert. Like, we got some pellies with us. We're wearing, because we want to travel light, so we don't have a lot of civilian, like super civilian clothes. We're wearing soft shells and
dressed practically. Pants.
Yeah. And, obviously we're not from there, all that stuff. And so finally this, white Opel hatchback shows up and parks right in front of us, and the guy gets out, and he looks at us, and we're like, finally? And he doesn't speak any English. So it's like, okay, well, there's actually in Poland, there's, a lot of people don't speak English, so whatever, Google Translate. And I'm looking at this car, and I'm like, I don't think our kit's going to fit in there. So I type this in, and I show it to him, and I was like, I don't think our gear is going to fit in the back. And he looks at our gear, and then he looks at the back of the car, and he kind of gives me like a 50-50 gesture, and then I'm like, hey, can you help us load it in, right? Like, we'll see if it fits. And he like kind of shrugs. He's like, okay. So he goes and he like brings down the back seats and he puts all the stuff in and whatever. And that's when I noticed the car's kind of messy. And I'm like, oh my God. And there's like crumbs and like coffee stains on the cup holders and stuff. And I'm like, your car's kind of messy. And he looks at it and he looks at me and he gives me this kind of like confused but like kind of contemptuous look. And I'm like, all right, whatever. I'm not going to piss the guy off. I need this car. So I'm like, okay, whatever. So the bags are in there and the bags fit and whatever. So I'm like, okay, so I'll bring this back in like 4 or 5 days, because we were working with another company that was going to provide us a car from that point, but it was being driven in from another country, a long story. So we're like, okay, so we just need this for a few days. And he's like, well, he writes this reply and he's like, it's my daughter's birthday on Sunday and I was going to take her to a fair, like a carnival. So can you please bring it back before then? And I'm kind of annoyed now because I'm like, we rented this thing, and that's when I realized, like, okay, this is not a car rental. This is like a peer-to-peer sharing service or something, right? Like, this is some kind of or that's why it's so unprofessional. And so I'm like, well, I'm about to say, well, man, like, we rented this for the we paid already, etc. Like, this is not okay. And that's when I look up and I see a white hatchback Opel with the Panic logo on it drive in and park right next to us. And I realize that this guy had the exact same car, and he just didn't question things, just went with it. And we were just like, we're taking your car to Ukraine, we'll bring it back in 5 days, as agreed. And he's like, can you bring it back a little sooner than that? I'm going to take my daughter out for her birthday.
The man had no idea he was about to give his car up, and then just decided to be polite about it.
Yeah, he just like loaded our gear into his car. He listened to me insult the state of cleanliness of his car. He went with it, and he was just completely willing to just let us take his car. And it was funny, and he had a good laugh about it, obviously, when we realized. But like, it was one of those like laughs of relief. But it also was quite touching because like this random guy knew we were going to Ukraine, and he was just willing to like let us borrow his car. He didn't even have my ID or anything. I hadn't even gotten to that point where it was like, oh, you need to take a picture of my driver's license. Like, he just like, okay, well, I guess you guys need it.
Yeah, the man's just like, oh yeah, I mean, anything for them, like, you know, God bless.
Yeah, I mean, at that point, Poland was super united on this topic. So yeah.
Fucking hell.
That's hilarious. What ended up happening? I imagine he got the car back. I hope he got the car back.
We didn't take his car. we laughed about it, and then we loaded it into the car next, and he had a big laugh, and then he's like, okay, I'm going to go because I'm late for a movie. So the guy also probably missed the first 20 minutes of whatever movie he was going to see, too. Yeah, poor freaking guy.
What a legend.
Yeah, and then we ended up driving, and I was really pissed because I was like, at that time, we're all worried about Russian counter intel, and we're always Russian intel, and we're like an obvious car rental driven near the border of Ukraine is not very low profile, so we were kind of pissed about that, but we made it work.
Yeah, well, the branding on the side, like, oh, that car has Polish on the side of it. Huh, I wonder if that's a foreigner coming in to do some shit.
Yeah, nice. I got out of the airplane in Warsaw, and everybody on that plane was NGO journalist or about to volunteer for the Legion. And they all the Legionnaire looking dudes, a lot of them Cold Warriors, like, maybe they were in Bosnia or something with the Canadian forces back like in the 90s, and they were really looking to kind of square that circle with Ivan because they were trained to fight Ivan. And now they've gained like 50 pounds and they're much older, but they think they can still bring the hurt to the enemy. And they're all wearing like their old rucksacks and tactical whatever and etc. And I'm looking at these guys, I'm like, if I were Russian intelligence, I would just plant a guy in Warsaw Airport and just photograph every single dude who walks out of that gate who looks like he's about to go to war. And that kind of set the tone for the whole thing. Man, the level of OPSEC in Poland at that time was so laughably low. You had a lot of special operations, a lot of intel, a lot of diplomatic agencies, and it was like Lollapalooza. And it was actually really hilarious to see kind of the level of overt low profile, like not even gesturing at low profile. If you were on that, like from Rzeszów, or I guess from Krakow, past Rzeszów, down that main highway into Lviv in Ukraine, down that highway, every single 4- or 5-star hotel was just rammed full of Western government types. And
yeah, and you can always tell by the look.
Oh yeah, like you have a bunch of kind of like dweeby looking guys with sport coats, and then you have a lot of tatted up, super fit looking guys. And yeah, you're like, no one's fooling anybody. And eventually, I got to the point where like, okay, I'm just gonna have to blow off this etiquette and say hi. So I just go up to them and I'd be like, hey guys, I'm doing this, and if you know anything about this geography, I'd really appreciate it because we're going to be driving in here in like a day or whatever. And they give me this look, and I'd be like, what, you're on holiday surfing in a landlocked country, like with all your kind of your surfer style gear, man? Like, it's pretty obvious where you're from. So And eventually, all these soft guys and whatever, they all just started. They were all like, "All right, fine. Like, nobody's fooling anyone here. So we're all just gonna." And everyone was got super open about it.
That's something like, being in the intel space, like just kind of giving our listeners a bit of a 101. Like, what kind of risks do those kind of guys open themselves up to just by being overt as fuck? Clearly going into a war zone. Like, say you were like, some kind of Russian intel, and you were sitting in that airport, kind of documenting individuals coming through who are clearly going to be volunteers or otherwise involved in like a fighting or volunteer capacity. Like, what kind of dangers are they exposed to just from being identified coming through the airport?
Oh man, like how long is a piece of string? Dude, I was in a 5-star hotel, and we were living the lap of luxury. Like I said, we had we brought sleep rolls with us, but we're eating 3-course meals because for us, you stay at a 5-star hotel in Poland, and you're spending about 100 Canadian dollars a night, and for us, that's like pretty cheap for a night in a hotel, especially 5-star. But for a refugee, and granted, at the start of the war, most of the Ukrainian refugees who got out were, middle upper class to begin with. But for them, they are aiming much lower, right? They need their 2-star, 3-star hotels that are like $20 Canadian a night. And so for me, I was like, well, I can afford this. I'll stay at somewhere nice because I don't want to take a cheap bed away from, somebody who's got 5 kids and needs, rooms for them. So we were staying these nice places alongside all these alphabets from different countries and whatever. And when you would look at the Wi-Fi, they would literally have their Wi-Fi SSIDs literally say like X country embassy or something like that. It was absolutely hilarious. I hope one of you guys is listening and you're triggered because it was hilarious. I could not believe the level if Russian intel had their acts together and they had enough manpower to actually, put enough people on the ground, the amount of havoc they could have wreaked from a SIGINT perspective, from a human perspective, I remember my buddy, he started up Tinder, and I was so pissed because I was like, "Are you freaking kidding me, man?" And he's like, "What?" I'm like, "Do you if I were Russian intel, I would stick in some friggin' Tinder soft puppets and I would just screen cap the hell out of every single foreign guy in this radius. And you don't even need to be in Poland. You can just use the GPS spoofing feature or whatever and just say you're in Poland. Like, you're an idiot." But I mean, you look, Eastern European women are gorgeous, so I kind of get why he was motivated to do so. But yeah, idiotic. So yeah, the risks are potentially gigantic. Luckily, as far as we know, the proliferation of Russian intelligence in Poland at the time was not nearly what it could have been. So I think a lot of people were saved. But you had there's like a noise to signal ratio thing there because you had so many amateurs, amateur NGO guys, amateur journos. You had a lot of adventurers. You had a lot of people trying to join the Legion who barely had any experience.
Yeah.
You had a lot of bullshitters. We met this guy who clearly had serious psychological issues, and he had come from France, and he was trying to join the Ukrainian Special Forces. So you had so many people. The volume was so high. You would have needed if you were Russia, you would have needed a lot of manpower to sift through all that noise.
Yeah.
So, like, for adversarial intel officers and such, if they identified individual volunteers, what do you think the go-to action would be? Would it be like extortion or like threats against the family, or what do you think the go-to would be by identifying individuals?
Yeah, I mean, first you would want to figure out the value of those people and their access, right? It's just like any recruitment kind of a thing, right? If you're going to recruit an or try to flip someone or whatever, you got to figure out what kind of access they have. So, for instance, you've got guys I forgot his name, Cossack Gundy, and people like that who have higher profiles, right? So they're valuable. So if you could pre-position people to, if you have a photo of a guy who's coming in and you can do enough collection around him to figure out, oh, this guy's going to join, SBU, like intelligence service, special forces or something like that. He's going to have a lot of access. Then you can be like, okay, well, we know who he is, so we can compromise him through coercion, because we know enough about him and his family and where they live and whatever, and that we could potentially, at a minimum, we scare the hell out of him and he'll stop. But
make him ineffective, right?
Yeah, at a minimum, right? But like that kind of human intelligence stuff takes a lot of resource, and Russia at that time, their resource in the GUR and FSB and stuff was very fixated on trying to take Kiev. So
yeah. Like what I don't know how true this is, and maybe you'll have some more insight, but it sounded like fairly early in the war. I don't know if this has been stomped out or corrected internally yet, but it sounded like there was some resistance within the FSB to the invasion of Ukraine, and kind of basically the strategy used, and kind of basically how a lot of it went down. It sounded like Intel was somewhat split on involvement and actions taken and all of that. Do you know anything about that?
I don't know any more than is available through open sources. Gotcha. And from open sources, there were, there's footage of public discussions that Putin had with his senior defense officials, including the head of the FSB. And at one point, he essentially asked for the FSB's endorsement. And the head of the FSB was like, yeah, maybe conditionally on these things. And Putin was like, conditionally? Okay, excuse me? And then immediately the guy was like, yes, we endorse this 100%.
You want to fall down some fucking stairs or get blown out of the sky? We will do either.
There was a significant amount of time where we were just refreshing news feeds being like, is there going to be a coup? Is there going to be a coup? Is there going to be a coup? And hoping for that to happen, because there were some indications. There were government agencies. I remember the government of Moscow at one point, like a municipal, I don't know the term they used, but some kind of a municipal government or a ward or something like that, they made a public official memo condemning the invasion of Ukraine. And there
I wonder how fast those guys disappeared.
Oh yeah, and I remember their office was literally across from the Kremlin. Like, we geolocated their office, and like the municipal office of this sector of Moscow was like directly across from the Kremlin, like 1 block away or something like that.
Oh my gosh.
There was an optimistic period where we're like, okay, well, maybe Ukraine just hold out until there's a coup, and then that didn't happen. So
it's kind of funny how that all worked. It was like, this guy's going to die in a couple weeks, and he's crazy, and you look at his face, and he's all puffy, and so and so, all the kind of like, oh boys, the war's going to be over by Christmas propaganda, and none of it ended up happening.
I told my staff I'd be back in 2 weeks.
Yeah.
I'm like, they only need humanitarian aid one way or the other for 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Sure.
You were out there for 2 months?
2 months, yeah. And then at that point, I was like, I had injured myself a bit also, so I had to go back. But, it was fulfilling. I mean, especially after Afghanistan and the evacuation of Kabul, that left a very, I think, unfulfilled and bitter taste in a lot of the mouths of the people involved in that. So when soon thereafter Ukraine happened, it felt, in a very immature way, kind of redemptive to be able to maybe actually make more of a difference than you did in Afghanistan.
Yeah.
Did you were somewhat involved with the Afghanistan withdrawal, or?
Yes. Yeah. I think a lot of...
How have we not got onto the interesting topics until Ukraine? You've so many stories, and we ended up...
Dude, the stories we heard in the fucking car, I was like, oh my god, put a mic in front of this man. And then
the ones were in Shanghai. The Shanghai ones are hilarious, actually. But,
hey man, if you want to get into Shanghai, I am... we don't hear anything about China, really, especially like our guests about this show. Like, we've got a lot of global war on terror vets, but like, not anyone doing anything out in Shanghai or really Asia. So I mean, if you want to get into that, more than happy.
Yeah, I mean, this is historical at this point.
Yeah.
But I mean, first I'll say Afghanistan, it's very sad. It's still an ongoing thing, and there's still a lot of people trying to get people out of there.
Yeah.
And, you know, like Guy Ritchie came out with a film, and then I don't like it very much, to be very honest. But and then people forgot about it, right? So we like to break things and then just leave them. But anyways,
Empire's doing
yeah,
Empire
man.
shit.
Say again.
I said Empire's doing Empire shit.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, Shanghai, Hong Kong, Beijing, that was a riot. That was my early to mid 20s, and that was, oh man, and it doesn't sound sexy, like intellectual property protection. If you were in the US, that's a purely paralegal kind of occupation. And these days in China it would be similar. But at that time in
Kind of
China,
Wild West.
oh boy, like you would enforce that intellectual property with a baseball bat kind of a thing. We did all sorts of crazy stuff, and God, I'm trying to think of how much detail I can go in because
well, if you say anything you need me to redact, that's easy.
Yeah.
So, you know.
dude, we had so many clients. I mean, in the luxury space, obviously, and we would trace the counterfeiting all the way up the chain. So I'd go and I'd pretend to be a tourist and buy some luxury watches and be like, well, I want this very specific vintage watch. Can you make a replica of that? And they'd be like, well, we don't have that. And I'd be like, I'll be willing to pay a lot for it. And you go up that supply chain. And it was very old school human kind of work. Not to say that I was old enough to actually understand what old school human work was. It's not like I was in East Berlin or anything, but it was, you know, finding people, finding their vulnerabilities, figuring out what motivates them, mice, like money, ideology, coercion, excitement, you know, what makes them do that, and then how you can leverage that to destroy that whole network. And I, you know, it makes me kind of sad because I made a lot of friendships with a lot of these counterfeiters who were just, you know, feeding their families and whatever. And ended up really destroying their lives for a while. I'm still in touch with them. A lot of them, you know, managed to adapt and bounce back. And, you know, I tried to ensure that they had kind of support packages so that they wouldn't get, like, murdered by organized crime or, which actually was not a huge risk at that time, but, you know, always a risk to an extent when you're in a criminal enterprise. And that they could afford to feed their families. And there were some payouts, but after I left China, I'm told all those payouts stopped because they didn't need to pay them anymore because I was gone, right? And
oh man,
I've heard stories from real intel guys, you know, U.S. agencies or whatever, and it's very similar stories, obviously very different stakes.
Yeah, but still, that sucks.
It does. It made me feel really bad. Yeah, I mean, I met these guys, you know, they're kids, and, you know, they had big plans for their kids, and all this other stuff. And yeah, you know, most of them found their feet, but it was, you know, you befriend them, you have a carrot, you have a stick, and you make yourself their only way out. And that's how you do it. And so it's difficult because to do that kind of work, you actually have to be very empathetic because you have to know who they are and understand their motivations. But if you're very empathetic and you screw them over, it doesn't feel very nice either.
Yeah.
But we did that from the luxury side of things, consumer products. We did like pharmaceuticals, a lot of like, there was like a fake Viagra Cialis kind of counterfeiter we busted. And then like idiots, we decided to each try one out of curiosity.
Oh no.
That was really dumb of us. I almost went to a hospital because I was like, it's not supposed to last that long, right?
Oh, fuck.
And it was like kids and old ladies with like manual pill presses. Like, they were like manually, like hand stamps, like heavy, you know, and they were just stamping these things. So I like saw the manufacturing. I still took one because I'm an idiot. Anyway,
Why would you do that?
I don't know. I thought it was funny. It was suggested. I thought it was funny. It sounded like it'd be a funny joke. We were going to all walk around the office with boners for a little bit after that. But anyways, we did like automotive.
Very young, I know someone who took just like a regular Viagra, just for fun, just to see what would happen. And he was the story of like rolling around clutching his dick at the 4.5 hour mark while people called the emergency services.
And that was Viagra with quality control, eh?
That is like normal Viagra.
Yeah, I was getting pretty concerned.
Yeah.
And my assistant was very concerned. She was like, and that's, it's pretty cool to be in your early 20s and have an assistant.
Yeah.
And yeah, she was very worried. It's actually a pretty, like, sexuality in China is like a very, at that time especially, was like a very kind of weird and interesting kind of thing. I remember when I was in China, I was reading like a Chinese Shanghai expat article or something, and apparently Durex had did a study, and at that time, it's like less than 2% of women in China had ever had an orgasm or something. So like, there was a very Puritan and like, how else do I say, but like not so fun attitude towards sex. Pre-communist revolution with Confucianism, and then the communists weren't exactly the sexiest people in the world either, right? So
Yeah.
I think that the sex ed and that understanding of it, etc., was just so immature that my assistant, who was older than me, she was in her 30s, she was like really freaked out. She had no idea what the hell was going on.
Yeah.
But they were just pretty immature in that way culturally. But yeah, we did a lot of other industries, like automotive and stuff like that too. And parallel trade is very interesting. And I wish I could say what we did with the parallel trade thing, but I feel
What is parallel trade, out of curiosity?
So that's when you go to, for instance, Portland, Oregon, and you buy a $60,000, for instance, Mercedes S-Class, and then you sell it in China for $350,000.
Oh, yeah.
Because Mercedes would set the price at that time at $350,000, luxury tax, whatever. So if you are importing it, parallel trade like gray market, let's say you don't sell for $350. Let's say you sell for $250. You give the customer a $100,000 savings, but you're making boatloads.
So, like, you were doing some cracking down on parallel trading?
Yeah, so we would do the similar thing as counterfeiting. You'd investigate them, and then you would convince them to stop.
One way or another.
Yeah, because the police, they did not really enforce it back then, unless they had a reason to. And by reason to, I don't mean that there was a legal justification and there was a warrant or whatever. I mean that they had buddies that paid them to do so. So a lot of our work was paying the cops to do their job, or paying more than the perpetrator was paying them to look the other way.
That's what I was going to ask, was like kind of the situation with bribing and like how reliable law enforcement was out there. Was that like just kind of, because I know in some countries it is just like every single law enforcement officer, it's like they will supplement their income any chance they can get, and there is absolutely no qualms about doing so. And then some where it's like a little bit more mixed. Is that how was it in China?
When we did executive protection for very high net worth clients, we had police escorts with air support and all sorts of like sirens. So like it's very cool, and I think it's an experience that a lot of guys don't get until they are like, Secret Service, diplomatic security, or whatever. But like when you're driving through traffic and the reds and blues are flashing and the traffic parts for you, just because you're that important, it's a very cool feeling. And when you look at the laws and regulations of China, like a private American or British or whatever individual, just because they're high net worth visiting China, legally should never get that kind of treatment. So we had access to that. And again, I think these days it's a very different game. Obviously, I would not want to work there these days. It's a pretty scary place from an Orwellian kind of security perspective. But back then it was wild, and very fun if you're riding the wave.
More like kind of like corporatist, oligarch owned, and like money kind of makes the rules back then, or
absolutely, yeah.
Probably
it was like, you guys have played Cyberpunk. I was saying I played it. I played Cyberpunk when I had COVID. the amount of, and I played Corpo, that was my character.
Of course
it was.
And like the number of kind of like nostalgic moments I had to like Hong Kong and Shanghai while playing Cyberpunk.
Like you're like, wait, I've already done this. Why am I role playing it?
When you're when you were talking about like corpo security and all this like cloak and dagger stuff for God, who like probably Rolex and fucking Swatch Group and big corpos like that. My mind immediately jumped to like Arasaka.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't put the watch manufacturers to be quite as monolithic and quite as
Not quite as much.
Zaibatsu-like,
You
but
didn't kill anyone.
yeah. I mean, I don't like the. Obviously, in the video game, I executed a lot more ethically contentious things than I didn't realize. But, yeah, it was very, and obviously, aesthetically speaking, Shanghai is an amazing city. Hong Kong also, but I actually like Shanghai even more. Sorry, say that again?
I actually love Hong Kong. I think like a lot of Americans especially think of Hong Kong as this weird, a lot of Americans I've talked to think of Hong Kong as part of China and also being a third world country.
It's so different.
Whereas, I'm not going to get into the weird geopolitics of it, but I actually, going there, it seemed like 10 years ahead of where I'm from. It was very cyberpunk.
Have you been to Shanghai?
I've not been to Shanghai. I've been to Hong Kong. I stayed around Kowloon area, and I've been to Shenzhen, but I haven't been any further than Shenzhen.
Oh, Kowloon's fun. I mean, Shenzhen is similar to Shanghai in that era because Shenzhen and Shanghai grew at a very similar pace. But at that era, let's say 2010 era, Shanghai was like a different planet because they were growing at such a pace that they were implementing all these modern construction technologies, modern lighting. For instance, LED lighting in 2010 across all the buildings, and all of the highways and the bridges had LED lighting. So you literally felt like you were in this Blade Runner-esque environment because there were logos glowing everywhere. Like if you're in Lujiazui or like near the river, so you were in a like Pudong, which is just east of the river, or the Bund, which is just west of the river. They had kind of converted these old European colonial buildings to becoming super high tech and putting logos all over them. And you have these pulsating lights on the highways that just stretch down the whole highway that are like glowing pink at 3 a.m, kind of a thing. And you just come out of there's a nightclub called Dada, which is this grungy. I think it was started by a Parisian because the French are everywhere in Shanghai. And so that's something else you'll find is the design is all French.
They have a lot of influence in Asia, don't they?
Yeah,
they do, and especially in Shanghai, all the designers, interior designers, graphic designers, what have you, all started by French expats. So it's quite beautiful in some ways, but it's jarring because you have like French design elements, ancient Asian ones, and then this high tech cyberpunky environment. And you'll be at this nightclub until 2 a.m. listening to some underground Parisian DJ drinking moonshine because like real alcohol at that time was very expensive to get. So if you asked for rum, they would have like domestically made rum with no quality control, and they poured it into a Bacardi bottle, and so you had you would hear often about expats and young people going blind and stuff and drinking like fake vodka and fake rum and stuff at that time.
Oh man.
So you'd be at this like club, or even there'd be like death metal band or whatever playing these underground kind of expat bars, and then you go out, and then the city would be flashing all these lights, and you'd have like Ana de Armas hologram kind of a thing, not actually, but it was quite a cyberpunky experience, and especially if you're working in the corporate security world there, or even in any industry involving technology, because if you're in any engineering or tech consumer products company that has proprietary information, corporate espionage is built into that business operation to a level that you would not expect anywhere else in the world.
Yeah.
Man.
Like, how is it having... I'm sure you've traveled to most corners of the world, but like at the same time, you've probably seen the underside of most corners of the world. Like, has that like soured travel at all for you? Like for me personally, I love seeing kind of the gritty, grungy side of places, like the kind of little bit unsafe parts of the world, because
Yeah.
it's so much more real than the sterilized places most of us come from.
I'll never go to
in the Western world.
Thailand for tourism.
Really?
Yeah.
Have you been there professionally?
Yeah. And Thailand's beautiful. And the hospitality is amazing. The hospitality industry is amazing. It's a wonderful paradise for a tourist. And if you're working there in a capacity that touches organized crime, it is some of the ugliest. I use the word ugly because it's like revolting. It's some of the most revolting industries. Like slavery is big there. People always talk about sex slavery, especially for minors. And that's definitely a thing. And you see that a lot of the imported sex tourism from the West and stuff. Not just the West, you had any kind of Central Asian also was there. But anyways, but you had a lot of just manual slavery. Like what a lot of people don't realize when they buy like pre-peeled shrimp is that's not done by a machine.
Yeah.
So when you start seeing that, when you are in, and there's a bit of, I think, like racism or something in here, because if you go to certain parts of the world and you encounter something that's violent or ugly or whatever, and you can kind of shrug it off and go, well, TIA or whatever, right? Okay, but when you're in Thailand, it has such a beautiful facade that it is very jarring to see what and the people are so wonderful. Your average Thai person is so hospitable and so caring to people that when you actually see the kind of world that maybe I shouldn't use the word tolerated but coexists alongside of it, it's very jarring. It's very revolting. It's like if it elicits a very primal kind of response to it. So I don't think I can go back to Thailand.
No, I can see why.
Yeah.
It's kind of like a lot of the second world nations like that. You're absolutely right. It's very weird and exploitive, a lot of the things that go on there.
Yeah, I think it's that juxtaposition of the trappings of like a very developed first world economy, socioeconomics, and culture, and when you see it heterogeneously mixing with really horrible things that you would attribute to underdevelopment. It's like, oh wow, it almost brings it home to you, because you're like, oh well, if it could happen here, maybe it could happen in Canada,
Yeah.
You kind of lift up the table skirt and you're like, oh, that's how they're doing this, or like that's how we have all of these amenities available to us.
Give it a couple of years, I think that shit could happen basically anywhere.
Yeah, and I mean it does, right? It does to a large extent. I personally think that the human trafficking gets a lot of press these days, and I think that it creates a bit of an illusory facade or aesthetic around what human trafficking is and how it works, and how the mechanics of that industry work. But it is a problem everywhere. You go. The U.S. is the most economically powerful country in the world, and human trafficking exists domestically, and it exists transnationally. So, there are people trafficked into the U.S. and Canada. There are people trafficked within it, to varying degrees. I mean, these days it feels like every kid around the corner from you is getting trafficked. That's not really how it works, but and the volume is not quite at that level, but it's like a big problem. And at least we're paying attention to it more now.
Yeah.
So, are there any other like kind of misconceptions about human trafficking that are worth pointing out, like compared to kind of like the narrative or what people assume to the reality?
Oh, I wish I was an expert in this. I have a friend who works very closely in this industry. The biggest thing and he's told me some, little trivia bits that were like, oh wow, that's interesting. One being that, most people are not just sex trafficked, human trafficked by people they know.
Yes,
so,
I've heard that.
Sorry, go ahead, Nathan.
Sorry, I've heard that. Like
a
that
family member selling a kid or something.
Yeah, it's not a case of it's usually not a case of what we see in the movies where it's like, okay, like a Taken or whatever. Yeah, usually it's thrown into a van. That does happen. It's rare, but it gets all of our attention. It's a dread risk because it's a very glamorous risk. It occupies a lot of our imagination. But in reality, it is people like selling their children or selling their nieces or nephews or promising your cousin who's in Nepal that he's got a great job waiting for him in Tennessee, and then he gets to Tennessee, and then surprise, you're now basically owned by like a local ethnically based gang or something like that, and you basically do slave labor. So that's more common. You know, nail salons and stuff like that for a long time were, you know, people always think about prostitution, but it's more common that they end up working jobs in like nail salons, right? And not prostitution jobs, they're literally just doing nails. But like when you think about the economics of a nail manicure that takes an hour and you're paying, you know, $15 for it, how the hell do those economics make sense if the person's not getting paid for it, right? So yeah, stuff like that. I wish I was an expert in this. I can absolutely introduce one. I'm sure he would love to come on your show.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. God, no, you're absolutely right. You don't think about that. You know, you're usually thinking about exactly Taken. You know, someone gets grabbed by a van outside, you know, their foreign hotel. Kind of reminds me. I had a friend who was, of all things, a flight attendant a long time ago, and she mentioned a story of how they accidentally found two young girls that were clearly being trafficked. And they were like 17, 18, flying from Nova Scotia to Toronto, and they were connecting on a flight to New York. And, you know, she struck up conversation with them, and they're like, yeah, we got scouted by a modeling agency. You know, they paid for our tickets. They, you know, so-and-so. And it rung red flags in her head. And so she mentioned it to the pilots. The pilots, you know, radioed it down to the ground. And like airport security met them as they came off, just to verify, to see if this was a real thing, because there were a couple of red flags. And as soon as apparently one of the girls messaged saying, "Hey, sorry, you know, they're looking into it. We're still on our way. We'll see you soon," they wiped everything. Their Instagram gone, emails gone. Everything was just. So yeah, those girls were probably going to be dead or worse if they had actually made it to New York.
Yeah, so the private jet industry, this is like an issue that they're confronting.
Yeah.
Because obviously, you know, the stakes are a bit higher, because if you're flying these girls in private, then
it wasn't private, it was a commercial.
Yeah, but I mean, if it's commercial, you have people who can ring the alarm, right?
Yes.
Like your friend and what have you. But private flights are, I mean, it's always been a thing. But now within the industry, because the private jet industry is interesting. It's become quite a kind of commoditized thing. Like you can go on Facebook and get a private jet. They're like Facebook groups and stuff like that of private jet owners who just like, you know, like Craigslist private jet flights and stuff. And there is still a culture of this like high net worth discretion, etc. And so that's abused a lot of the time to like move girls around. And if you can afford to fly a girl to Trinidad, Tobago, or whatever, Turks and Caicos maybe, or somewhere, because you are a multimillionaire already and your intent is not exactly pure, they don't have a lot of recourse at that point, because you know, you're wealthy, you brought them on a flight, you can take them back whenever you want to, but they can't afford a flight out. And so there's varying levels of coercion there, because they could like hypothetically straight up just chain them to a wall or something, like in, you know, Taken. But it's like that episode of Always Sunny in Philadelphia, right? There's the implication. So they don't even need to do that.
Well, you know, once we're out on the water, or once we're on the plane, who's to say?
Yeah, it's the implication.
Yeah, I laugh at that constantly because it's like so painfully true. Like, there's something so perverse about it.
Yeah.
I mean, like that. It's kind of like between a rock and a hard place with like the private flying industry. Because I mean, who are chartering private jets? Only people with massive amounts of wealth. Okay, do they want you, shouting from the rooftops who you're flying and where? Well, no, that's professionalism. And
Yeah.
obviously the most like obvious and overt, headline grabbing example in recent years was the whole Epstein thing, where there's like 30 plus years of history of girls being flown in for abuse with all sorts of like crazy high level people, and it just being under the radar and like just no possible way to really confront it at all, apart from like hearsay and rumors here and there, just kind of like shushed away. But like I'm sure outside of like the big headlines like an Epstein, like I'm sure there's a disgusting amount of smaller cases of that happening all over the
Yeah.
place.
This is gonna sound really classist of me.
Oh, no, you're fine.
Not that this, I haven't portrayed myself this way this entire interview, but though I think the biggest demo is probably the nouveau riche,
I
in
don't
this
know
private
what
jet
that
industry.
is.
Like the new money
Yeah, like
hustlers,
crypto rich.
crypto rich,
young
yeah,
tech.
guys who made 30 million
Yeah.
or something like that. So they can afford a private jet, but they can afford a private jet because private jet costs have gone down because of like I said, there's like a Craigslist economy of it now. It's not as
Yeah.
exclusive as it once was.
I've actually noticed that there's a airfield really close to me, and I was talking with some guys, and they're like, "Yeah, we could just like split a private plane for next SHOT Show. It'll cost a couple $100 each. It's basically just airfare."
Oh yeah, for if you're flying to Vegas or something, yeah. I
Yeah,
mean,
from,
you can get an empty leg
Nor-
for 20K transatlantic.
yeah, like
And
it's
so
if you're
yeah,
rich,
it's
it's
pretty.
very attainable.
Yeah, and I think the idea is that for a lot of people who've just started coming into that amount of money, as you see with the Lamborghinis and the big watches and all this stuff, you have this psychology to kind of start throwing your weight around and see what the thresholds of your power are.
Yeah,
And it's that psychology that will also create a lot of that kind of abuse, right? To be
yeah,
like, oh, suddenly I have power and I don't know what to do with it. Whereas when you get to more well-established wealth, there's a kind of a risk calculus built in to their psychologies where they're like, okay, well, unless I am very messed up psychologically, which a lot of them are,
Yeah, let's look at the
I'm
Royals.
not going to risk, like the potential blowback of something like this, when I don't need to because I'm so powerful that I actually don't need to break the law because I make the law. So, it's a psychological profile that I've started to see whenever I've been asked to investigate. Um, I have friends in the industry who sometimes ask me to do some due diligence and stuff like that, and it's always the same kind of profile.
I don't know how much kind of experience or relevancy it has to where you were working in kind of the intel industry, but with a lot of these kind of again, I don't know the exact lingo, but basically when you're compromising people with like various so the big thing with Epstein, a lot of people say about him is that he was some kind of asset, some kind of intelligence asset who was compromising various powerful people to X ends. Like, is that more like cartoonish in theory, or do you think,
No, it's believable. It's
yeah,
believable. Yeah. I
like,
mean, whether it's for government intelligence agency, there are a lot of private actors
yeah,
in
that's
that space. And I'm not a former proper spook, but have run adjacent to them before that I've seen like it is a world like that world is one where you can have a very outsized impact on geopolitics purely through initiative. Like if
just
you want to, if you're a smart enough person, you can have the equivalent impact to a $20 million CIA budget just by being in the right place at the right time and knowing what to do and leveraging the right people.
Having charisma and resources.
Yeah. So if Epstein maybe had a buddy or something like that that was running that show, whether it was for a government or not, I could definitely see. I mean, it'd be really dangerous to run blackmail for profit at that level, like really dangerous. So I don't think that's what it was, but I could see you running a collection service. That would be a very profitable one, I think, or at least you would derive a lot of value from it.
So do you think that factor, like being that you would get a lot of targets on your back from, state level actors, points to a person like him being more likely to be state aligned than, corporate focused?
No, I mean, look at Victor Booth, the Nicolas Cage character from Lord of War.
I was about to say, that name sounds very familiar.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's people like that in many different industries, many different fields, and they'll work for U.S. intelligence, they'll work for Russian intelligence, they'll work for whoever pays. And I actually don't know that much about Epstein in the way that there's so many people who have done so many incredibly amateur and some incredibly professional, depending on who you're talking about, investigations into him and into that whole operation. But I can imagine that the intelligence you can collect from your clients or whoever you bring to these islands would be so useful to so many different people that you would probably want to keep yourself a free agent. So I don't know. I mean, they might be state aligned because I remember that Ghislaine Maxwell has connections to Mossad or something like that.
Is she still alive?
I don't remember. She is? Okay.
That is very surprising to me.
I think she is.
Maybe too obvious now, but I mean, that didn't stop Epstein from hanging himself or whatever the hell happened to him.
Yeah, she's still alive. Yeah.
Yeah. I think she has some Mossad connections, but it may have been DSGI, or I don't remember exactly. But yeah, but like at that level, everyone knows each other. It's kind of like what I was saying with the elite British universities, where everyone meets each other. You'll have the kid of a sultan of some random small Asia Pacific country meeting with, some Texas oil air kid, etc. Like at a certain point, and this is what kind of makes me, whenever people talk about World Economic Forum, like WEF in Davos, which I've been to, people have like a lot of conspiratorial theories about it, and they're like half right, but the half wrong they are is very wrong, because they're visualizing this like James Bond-esque cabal of like bad guys trying to like put soy in the water and whatever chemtrails, etc. And that's not what they do. They lack the coordination to do that. They lack the willpower to do that, the motivation to do that. They lack alignment on their goals. But what WEF is a consolidation of this like old boys club. Well, not just boys now, but like this club of the most elite people on Earth, who generally have a similar disdain for people, writ large. And it's a very similar thing in the intelligence world. Like everyone knows each other. They all went to school together. They went to Sandhurst and they went to Georgetown and they went to Oxford or Cambridge or whatever. So Epstein was probably connected 1 or 2 degrees to every single intelligence service on Earth.
Oof. I mean, it makes sense if you think about it, but yeah, it makes me so creeped out thinking about just this old boys club. Like, well, what's that club a lot of the presidents were in, and how many of those
Skull and
and similar are all around the world? Sorry?
Skull and Bones.
Yeah, things like that.
People like to make it a cartoon, right? Like the Bohemian Grove, Bilderberg, etc. They want the Dan Brown Da Vinci Code kind of aesthetic on it,
and you just know it's like a lot less sexy. It can
it's
be
very boring.
It can be just as evil and be like, fucking like like miserably boring.
Like I've done Bilderberg, I've done WEF. It's very, very boring. It's a bunch of people it's like a big circle jerk where they'll pat each other in the back. I know I have a friend of a friend who's done Bohemian Grove, and it is just like an art retreat. But like that's not what is scary about them. What is scary about them is that they all run the world together.
Yeah,
Right?
that they're all friends.
there's
Yeah,
just
they don't like sacrifice a goat in the middle of their thing. They don't need to do that. They just, you know, bump each other and say, "Hey, actually, if you wouldn't mind executing a pump and dump on this stock next week, so that I can purchase this mine and do like a hostile takeover of this like local thing because I have a JV right now, but I want to buy out their stake in it." And that's all they have to do, right?
Which is like considerably more evil than killing some poor goat. Like,
yeah,
just casual, like, disdain for regular people.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And the manipulation of global affairs for just gain or ideology or anything else. I hate that. It creeps me out. It genuinely does.
It's something I also like. Obviously with our show and kind of the stuff we touch on, we do get a lot of people going like, all the way down the rabbit hole. Like me and Nathan, we live within the rabbit hole, but like,
Yes.
like if you go straight to the fucking bottom, like you are just you're like talking about Baphomet and all sorts of like, like circles of blood and shit. It's like honestly, it doesn't even have to get there to be the most sickening, insidious shit on this planet. They're the most heinous actions you can think of. It's like you said, people just trading stocks in a very malicious, disdainful way.
It's banality. Yeah, what they call the banality of evil. Like these guys don't even realize they're perpetrating evil because they don't see it as evil. It's just the world they live in, right? They live in a world where they trade stocks and their numbers go up and what have you, and they don't really think about the people that they're hurting in a lot of cases because they don't consider them people necessarily, right? They're not peers. They're just the masses.
Yeah.
And it's whatever. And that's what I tell a lot of people who will tell me about bad med or whatever. And it's like, no, there's a great book called, I forgot what it's called now. It's about dread risk. And it was, I did, in my master's degree, I did a section on counterterrorism. And this really stuck with me, this idea of dread risk. Because it's about 9/11 and the number of people who died after 9/11 as a result of 9/11. So, not talking about war on terror necessarily, but specifically car accidents. Because the number of car accidents in the U.S. skyrocketed after 9/11 because people did not want to fly because they were worried about terrorism, so they would drive. But it is much more dangerous to drive than to fly, and especially if you're executing like cross-country drives and what have you, your risk factors multiply. So many people were getting car accidents and dying because they want to fly because of terrorism, because terrorism is a sexy risk that occupies your imagination, and car accidents do not. So when you take that lens and apply it to all of these things that we're fixated on, which are these sexy risks, like our kids going to get pulled into a van. Does it happen? Yes, it does, just like terrorism happens. Does it happen often? Not as often as you would think. Are there billionaires who worship the devil? I'm sure there's at least one. But are they all that way? No, but the mundane reality of it, the practical effect is still that, there are still people being enslaved. There are still people being trafficked. There are still, high net worth people who have a tremendous disdain for humanity. There are still high net worth people who actually believe that they're doing like what's really good for humanity, but ideologically, their philosophies may differ greatly from what we consider to be 90% of what people want on the planet, right? And so, and I'm talking about, a lot of foundations and stuff that are out there, and, like people talk a lot about George Soros, for instance, and people talk about Bill Gates and what have you.
People preaching like a greener planet through population control, and you're like, isn't that just genocide with like fancy words, like slow genocide? But they say it with a smile and with like the right buzzwords.
Yeah, like do they think? I mean, I have mixed feelings about different agenda items in their agenda, but they probably think, I mean, I think it's 99% likely that they think that what they're trying to push socially is for the betterment of humanity, right?
Yeah.
So
Own nothing and be happy.
yeah, yeah. I mean that was WEF, right? And that was very much a thought experiment. I actually don't think I don't think that these elite people have the leverage and traction to be able to implement that at will. I actually think what it is they saw a trajectory that already existed. They conceptualized it into something very easy to say, and they said, you know what, that makes sense, and that'll be better for the planet, and so we can just say that we came up with that. But in reality, Airbnb and Uber came up with that, you know.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that they're quite disconnected, right, from the motivations of everyday people. So they see things in systems that they can manipulate, and when I say manipulate, I don't necessarily mean manipulate in like a malicious way or what they consider to be malicious, but they're like levers that they pull. You know,
Yeah.
it's like, oh, like how many people die of unemployment here, how many people die of war there, but you know, we all get to the same place. So, yeah, I think once you actually see how mundane all this stuff is, it's liberating in some ways, but it's actually worse in others because, like, oh well, like we don't have really any impact on this, and you know, evil exists, but it doesn't exist in the way that we can actually confront it and defeat it. So by making evil a cartoonish thing, it gives us this hope that, you know, He-Man or G.I. Joe or something can come in and we can save the day, but we can't because these are systems.
Yeah,
that's kind of what I've found the longer I go down this hole. And like, don't get me wrong, my disdain for these people has not wavered even a little bit. But I'm finding more and more it's less like Baphomet worshipping, like blood drinking Satanists, and more just like old boys club that just hate everyone that's not part of their club, doing things that some of them believe are right, some of them are believing in profit, and then there's all the middle management idealists along the way and every step of government that want to keep their like middle level bureaucratic make work job. Yeah, and some of them again like really do believe in what they're doing, even though it is objectively really fucked up. But it's just self-perpetuating. It's
the system,
all the
right?
way down.
And like each middle manager, they have such a small slice of that what they see is like, that's fine. Like, there's nothing wrong with what I'm doing. But then you add up the impacts of 1,000 of them and see how they interact with each other, and you're like, oh, okay, well, you know, these are the positives that come out of the system, and these are the negatives, and there's a lot of negatives, but nobody's thinking about them when they do their tiny slice of it. They can't conceive the impact that might have. So yeah, like the systems in place, and I hate saying the system because it sounds like this anarchist thing, but it's entropy. It's like the entropy of natural organization.
Yeah.
I think that's something anyone who fancies himself like, you know, I want to be a freedom fighter or idealist or whatever has to really be an adult and be serious about when thinking about these things is like, you are not fighting this great evil. You are fighting selfish, fucked up human beings with resources and capability. And like identifying the difference between those two makes confronting the problem a hell of a lot more effective because you remove like the fantasy and like you were saying, kind of the sexy dangers of situations, and you start confronting what the actual dangers of the situations are and what the actual motivations are. So if you're coming from a point of view where like every bad man is some kind of like, you know, demon worshipping cultist, like your idea of their motivations compared to what their actual motivations are. And like you said, I'm sure there are like the creepy, crazy cultists out there, but the vast majority of them, vast majority of them, they're just old blue bloods who want as much money and power as they can get, like obscene piles of the stuff.
Yeah, they want to help their buddies get richer. They want to become richer, and some of them really do believe that they're helping the good of humanity by, you know, take all the guns away or, you know, restrict, you know, X or Y. But
they're stupid.
Yeah,
like, they're just as stupid as we are, right?
Yeah.
They're not particularly more intelligent. They just grew up in a different systems. They learned how to manipulate, you know, the NASDAQ in the same way that a welder learns how to manipulate, an arc welder and a acetylene torch. It's the same, like in terms of proficiency, it's the same level of proficiency. It's just a completely different tool that they're using.
And a vastly different yield.
Yeah. And if you zoom out, this is all just a human psychology problem, to be very honest, which is that's the problem that nobody wants to confront. It's like we're wired a certain way, and it creates these systems. So
yeah, God, my mind jumps to like I grew up in upper middle class household in so and so. Like I wasn't poor until I just fucked off when I was a late teenager, and kind of
I discovered poverty.
I discovered poverty by going and working minimum wage and living in a shithole apartment.
Becoming an artist
eventually. But just like the attitude that those social circles had. And this isn't even like the rich. This is the doctors and the lawyers and the small franchise owners in a medium-sized eastern city. The disdain that they had. My mind jumps to a certain member of my immediate family that I won't name and shame, who's like talking about like diehard liberal, yes, we need to do these things, we need to take the guns, we need to all of these, and then in the same breath talking about poor people and quote, you don't want to go to that area. There's too many black people, unquote.
Oh my God. Oof.
Yeah.
I don't oof often. That's an oof. Okay.
The quiet parts out loud kind of thing. And it's like the absolute disdain for people who aren't you, but at the same time, like this pre-programmed, like want to at least fake being a good person and support policies that mirror that. There's a lot of it.
There's a lot of that in Canada too, I find.
Yeah, a ton of it in
passive aggressive culture.
Yeah,
I'm saying the right thing.
60% of Canadian culture is like, at least we're not America.
Oh my God. Well, we voted in Justin Trudeau 3 times, so
it was fucking wild to me. Jesus, like. Man, I hear shit from across the border. I'm like, oh my God, like, how is this? Like, from the outside looking in, it's wild. And I realize, too, it's, different seeing news media about there and being there. But
it's just political laziness, too, right? It's like people want to believe a certain ideology, and so they'll very easily just say, well, maybe Trudeau's not perfect, but
at least he's not the X. At least
Trump
he's not Y.
Is what he would constantly be like. Oh, you don't want to vote in Donald Trump or something, and therefore you need to vote for me, Justin Trudeau, because I don't do blackface anymore. But etc. Yeah, no, it's it. As a Canadian, I absolutely feel what you're saying, man. I absolutely do. But I mean, if you want to, you made yourself poor. If you want to make yourself poor, start a fashion company.
You know what? Hey, and we haven't talked about your company basically this entire time. I feel like we'll show it more at the end. Your suits
I wanted to.
Awesome.
Sorry.
I'm looking. Your suits are fucking awesome. I'm looking at my stupid Hugo Boss red labels in my closet right now and feeling like an absolute schlub.
Oh well, they are a labor of love.
Yes,
and I want to say half the suits that we make have my fingerprints on them, so to speak. Like I will just go through our customer ledger and I'll look at the photos, and then I'll contact Steve, our fitting guy or pattern cutter or someone, and I'll just be like, "Hey, have you looked at this guy? His like left shoulder is a bit lower. I think he must have had a collarbone injury or something. Have you compensated for that? Why don't you do like a double? Why don't you like double the felt padding and add a canvas to the shoulder or something like that?"
Yeah.
And Steve like, "I know, Alex, I already did that." And I'm just like micromanage the hell out of them. Because it is a labor of love, and as a result, the suits are wildly unprofitable because we put so many man hours into them.
You know what? You have enough irons in the fire. I think it's, and the idea of a suit that is designed to actually do the sort of cool stuff that we want to do, it's very cool. It's I like it.
Thanks. Yeah. They're still our flagship. I mean, I'm very happy with the sunglasses
The
and the polos.
Those are actually like ANSI rated, right?
No, so the sunglasses right now are not ANSI. The lenses are ANSI rated.
Yes, that's
The
what I mean.
frames are not because
Yeah.
they do not have the side protection that's required.
Yeah.
And I've done this test 3 times or 4 times now with basically we had to custom make the side shields to fit the shape and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And we had issues with they were too brittle. So, for instance, in one case, we did the high mass test, which is like a 0.5 kilogram steak that flies into the lens,
Yeah.
and the lens was fine, but the side shield from the vibration shook off because the
Yeah.
brackets were too brittle, right? So it's things like that has been driving me insane. But I'm
Yeah.
very proud of them because like we discovered this new lens technology back in 2020. We were one of the first ones to use it. And the sunglasses, I'll put it this way, sunglasses have a profit margin on them, which is better than the suits,
Yeah.
but it's still something that I can be
tailoring
proud
is
of making.
Yeah. Bespoke tailoring, especially in, Western world like Canada, United States, or America, so fucking expensive for a reason. Like the idea of having a suit, and I promise, we have no business relationship. I'm not trying to show you guys. Like getting the suits out that you do for the price that you do is fucking wild. But like, also, I like the idea of the sunglasses that don't make me look like I have a gun in my pants or I'm driving like a rusty.
That comes
Tacoma.
from Beirut, man. I was in Beirut once, and I was, there was an IGO that I was subcontracting for that just wanted me there to. There was like a Chinese cooking oil involvement. It was like a whole thing. But basically, I was in Lebanon, and then I was told that there was like a pretty high chance at that point that the war was going to kick off.
Yeah.
And like the Civil War. And I was like, oh, great. Like, I want something that protects my eyes because if an RPG goes off or something, I'd rather be ugly than ugly and blind.
Yeah.
And I had Oakley's, and I love Oakley's. I love the design, etc. But I was like, if I put these things on, Hezbollah is going to be on me in a second.
Yeah.
And they'd be right to do so because that is a big old broadcast no matter what part of the planet you're on.
Oh yeah, and they were like, they were M frames. Like there was no question. Like so I was like, oh man. So I just kept wearing my Ray-Bans, and I was like, okay, so if there's an explosion, the CR39 lenses are gonna like I didn't know what they were at the time, but I think they're CR39. They're just gonna shatter and go into my eye.
You'll be wearing them forever.
Yeah. So after that moment, I just kept thinking about it for like the rest of my life. And then when because obviously with COVID, the demand for tailoring went down quite a lot for like 2-3 years. We're like, well, what can we do? And I was like, well, I hear that sunglasses are very profitable. Like Luxottica makes sunglasses for like 50 cents and sells them for like $300.
Yeah, Luxottica is fucking wild. Everything with
So I went into it with those expectations, and then I was like, oh, okay, our profits are nowhere near that, but at least we make a little bit of money.
And ratings are expensive.
Yeah, the lens is really expensive. That's where the cost is, because it's like a proprietary technology from Japan, and nobody else makes it. So it's very low volume and stuff. And I don't know, if you have seen it, but like we have a lot of trouble keeping things in stock because it's funny. I always thought that working with Japanese manufacturers would be really easy because they have this like aesthetic of like a work culture that's very like straight laced and very like process driven and very protocol driven. But actually, I found working with China to be like Chinese individuals to be easier. I never really say work with Chinese individuals to be a lot easier because they're much more they're very like eager to please, so to speak. Also, my tailors are like we have a family history with my tailors. Like my family's known them for like 2 generations, so that makes things a bit easier. But yeah, so getting the inventory for the lenses has been really difficult, and we're still dealing with it. But we finally got enough volume that at least they take us seriously and they're making our lenses properly.
Yeah. Well, I think I've heard, and I don't know how true this is, the money in suits is usually in the accessories.
Yeah, so we decided we'd do like a Chanel No. 5 thing, right? So our flagship product is the suit, just like a Chanel handbag is like $10,000 now or something like that.
Yeah.
But most women don't own a Chanel handbag, but most do own a bottle of their perfume, Chanel No. 5. So that was in my mind for quite a while around profitability, but I just couldn't find a product that I was willing to put my name on because, like, if you look at my polo shirts, if you look at the gloves, if you look at sunglasses, like, they all have a unique value proposition for our end user. Like the polo shirts, I wore that for 2 straight months in Ukraine, just that polo shirt, because it's pure merino, and so it's quick dry, it's knitted, all that stuff. It's like perfect for a one bag traveler, and the sunglasses are impact resistant. And so for a while we were trying to figure out what we could sell that would align with kind of the integrity of the brand. I didn't want just like to slap a logo on something and just be done with it.
Yeah, just rebrand something from fucking China. That's being sold for half as much in AliExpress.
You can get a decent pair of sunglasses made for $10 from an Alibaba vendor if you buy 1,000 of them.
Yeah,
like it's a decent quality one, right? Mine cost a large multiplier of that, which kind of sucks. And that's another reason our inventory is so low, because we buy a very small volume because the carrying cost is so high. But there's something I can be proud of. I'm like very proud of these sunglasses and the polo shirt also, and the gloves. The gloves I joke about, they were like 3 or 4 years in the making because COVID hit just as we were trying to release them and all sort of stuff. So it's been the accessories have definitely some profit margin in them because otherwise I wouldn't make sense for me to do them. But they are an excellent product that I'm very proud of. Whereas the suits, we still do them basically just out of love.
yeah. I need to get one at some point, at some time. Maybe I'll get married in one. Who knows? That'll be awesome.
Dude, I looked at you. I styled you in my head when I met you. Like I do that with everybody now. So
I love that. And I'm going to pick your brain on that later. Probably not in the show because people aren't going to give a shit.
No. We should send Alex the picture of what we managed to. I mean, what you wore as a suit when we went to hang out with Commando Bond, Caleb, and what I scavenged together.
Dude, you looked pretty good. We got something together for you.
Thank you, but I'm such like a scruffy motherfucker. Whenever it comes to I know exactly what I'm going to wear for my wedding. It's going to be like a very traditional, rural England kind of suit, like kind of the.
You've got like the double barrel cracked over your shoulder, and you got the
I absolutely would do that for you. I'll pull up the picture.
Dude, I love putting rugged or scruffy or Filson looking dudes, look like lumberjack dudes, and putting them in a suit because styling them is so much fun. Because you can pull in these kind of Peaky Blinders aesthetics or whatever it is.
Yeah.
You can have guys who look like tatted up like Post Malone or whatever, and if you stick them in an English rope shoulder suit, they look like they came out of a Guy Ritchie movie. I love doing that.
There you go. That's what
I love that. I love that.
That blue one, something like that. I want to get from my hometown in England. It's gonna be my something blue. I will be the something blue. That's my plan. But I don't own a suit. I have had no reason to, and I have distinctly, designed my life around not needing a suit through all of my choices. And now I'm getting to, now that I've got a little bit of seasoning to me and a little bit of age and wisdom. I'm like, I mean, a suit would be cool.
Every year, I think we're going to go to the Vesper Bar. I think we're going to put on suits. We're going to have our little Berettas or whatever, our little vintage guns, and we're going to go to the Vesper Bar.
I was carrying this ugly.
I think I missed that one. That was with Ian McCollum, also, right?
We missed him. That was my fault. We were all supposed to go and drink. And what was I doing? I think I was styling you.
We were just late. We were. Our timing was dog shit,
bad. But we caught Caleb, and we ended up having some martinis, which were a lot stronger. I don't drink. I think like the only time I've drank this year has been SHOT Show, and I did not realize that the Vesper martinis are like 5 shots each.
Oh, dude, if you go back to London,
Yeah.
go to Duke's. Duke's Bar in London makes the best martini on earth. It's like the most pure expression of a martini.
You know, I actually am a sucker for martinis. I'm going to have to try that.
It's like 5 straight ounces of booze, dude.
I like
it's
that.
It's frozen, so they don't use any ice.
Yeah.
And then they bring their lemons in from Amalfi daily on like a Ryanair flight or something like that. Because I think one of their staff literally lives in Italy, so they fly to London every day for work, and they bring like a bag of lemons with them. And it is literally just frozen vodka or gin with some chilled vermouth and an Amalfi lemon twist, and that's it. That's the whole martini. And so it smacks you in the face, because that one drink is like 5 measures of booze.
I want to try that.
Night.
Yeah, and probably cap myself at that because the last day of SHOT, like the very end, I had 2 martinis. I ended up having just like a laughing fit at the Vegas prostitutes. It wasn't
the famous ones, the ones at the Circle Bar.
The ones at the Vesper Bar, not the Circle.
Oh, okay. No, that was a different vibe.
Yeah, we were educated to ladies of the night and what the many forms they take, and we're like, oh, now I see them everywhere. Oh my god, everyone here is a whore.
Actually, I'd never recognized one before, but as soon as you know what to look for, holy shit! And I laughed so hard I couldn't breathe. It's weirdly like cultural slumming is one of my favorite things, I think. But yes, suits. I like suits. I'm going to pick your brain on the styling thing, I think.
Yeah, would be happy to. Anytime. We'll get you guys out at Vesper Bar next year in form.
Hell yeah.
I bully... Actually, not correction. Caleb bullies me a lot. He bullied me into Beretta, and I'm not regretting it at all. So
genuinely, I actually like Berettas too. And I don't know if they're having a renaissance now. But I hear a lot of people talking about Berettas as this like pièce d'alt, where like 15 years ago everyone was like, piece of crap. I think because back then it was issued still.
Yeah, they were like,
right?
Marine
back in vogue.
The Megs were all really old, so they barely worked. Yeah, it's like the fate of any issue gun, I think.
But yeah, let's get you in a suit. Do you have a suit, Nathan? Because I think that every man should own at least one, and you could wear a suit every single day, in any environment. I genuinely believe this. You don't have to wear it with a tie. You don't have to wear it with a shirt. You can wear it with a t-shirt, wear it with a sweater or polo shirt or whatever. And it's incredibly versatile. My old roommate, his dad, wore a suit every day for the past like 30 or 40 years because he considered it to be really easy. It's like a Mark Zuckerberg thing. Like you get up in the morning, you have to decide what you're going to wear. You really just grab it like a t-shirt and your suit, and you're good.
I love that. And yes, I have 5 suits, but none of yours, and they're all like kind of off the shelf, minor tailoring, cheap things mostly.
At least you got them tailored, man.
Yes,
like that's you're at the 80% mark, right? 80th percentile right there, because I think a lot of people will buy off the rack and just believe that that's how it should fit, and then
it's generally brought in a little around the waist in the jacket, and the pants tapered to a modern fit is usually where I go. But eBay has been my go-to for suits, just because like I'll need something of a certain color for something, and I'll just get something like new old stock for $100. I love
that.
Yeah,
and you can experiment very easily with it too, with different cuts and stuff. Like if you go to a mall these days, you can go to Xenia, you can go to Hugo Boss, you can go to Jose Banks. They all have the same cut. It's like Scandinavian, quasi-Italian kind of cut. And it drives me nuts because, like, why would you go to a bunch of different brands if you all carry the same thing? Quality might be slightly different, but not even by that much. But the cut and the look is all the same no matter what brand you go to.
Yeah. No, I agree. Like, tailoring is really important, and I've kind of found that the hard way when I didn't know what I was doing and kind of looked like a funeral director or a waiter 100% of the time. But
that's how I look.
A bespoke suit is on my list, and it'll have to be done by the Vesper Bar or I don't know, my wedding.
Well, we're gonna do our party this coming year.
Hell yeah.
because we didn't this year. We might make it a Biennale now because, my gosh, going to SHOT Show when you're not trying to organize that party is an incredibly relaxing experience. Otherwise, it's hell. But we'll do the party this coming year, and generally speaking, people it's a fun excuse to dress up a little bit. I think at SHOT, you get used to your cargo pants and your corporate branded polo shirt and whatever. And it was surprising to me how well the industry embraced a night where you actually put on, something nice and go to like a elegant soiree kind of an event. I didn't think I was worried there would be no appetite for that, but there very much was. So you'll have somewhere to wear it for sure.
Yes, that's excellent. I'm looking forward to it already. BR, I'm going to bully you. I'm going to bully you into what are you? BR? We'll find out.
My guy. Basically everything I've worn for the last 4 or 5 years has come from thrift shops and Goodwill.
I'd say you look like you probably want an unpadded shoulder or a very lightly padded shoulder. And then to embrace the English thing, you can throw a bit of rope on it, even though it's unpadded. It'd be interesting.
I think my build definitely requires some love from a tailor, just because off the rack absolutely fucking punishes you, especially in the States for my body type. I'm I either look like I borrowed a suit from dad, or I don't even know. It's just a fucking sloppy mess, regardless of what I get. So
I think that it's like I was saying, they have just these universal, what they consider to be crowd-pleasing, lowest common denominator cuts that have gone all the way up to even quite elite price points like Canali and Brioni and stuff. And it drives me nuts because, for instance, on a very skinny guy who's bonier, what you want like a curve, what we call some belly in the lapel. And you want the pockets to be a little bit slanted and a little bit curved to give the appearance of more bulk, more body. And you cannot find anything like that these days in a store, off the rack. There is a trend, a cut that's on trend or a look that's on trend, and everyone will carry that for the year, for the 5 years or whatever. And conversely, if you are a pretty big guy, you may want very geometric straight lines to kind of give you some structure if you're very round or something. And when you get these obviously everything ends up being a crab. In tailoring in the past however many years, everything ended up becoming this weird Scandinavian Italian hybrid, and it's driven me nuts that you can't find anything off the rack that doesn't look like that. So I'm very happy to experiment with you guys.
Yes, I'm looking forward to it.
We will more than happily take you up on it. An odd question to end on, but I've just enjoyed listening to your passion for tailoring and what you do over at Grayman and Company. But how did you transition from the spaces you were in with the Intel stuff to Grayman and Company? Was it gradual? Was it sudden?
So it was somewhat sudden. I was not happy at this big corporate company because I had 3 engagements in a row that were uninteresting to me. And my buddy, who is this Taiwanese Brit, who, Sandhurst, Cambridge, Harvard, kind of a guy, he basically at one point broke and was I'm done with this. I'm going to go to Taipei and I'm going to start this ice cream shop. It's a centrifugal ice cream shop. So it's you put it in centrifuges and there's an endothermic reaction and it creates ice cream in this beaker basically. And I looked at him and I was like, "Oh, you're Taiwanese." He was like, "Yeah." And I was like, "Your parents are going to murder you." You went to Harvard, you're at this big prestigious corporate firm that everybody knows, big name, Goldman Sachs just pitched you to join the Goldman Sachs security team last month or whatever, and you're gonna start an ice cream shop.
Fuck yeah, buddy.
It's your bliss.
I gotta live for me, man. I'm oh my god, your Chinese mother is gonna have a heart attack.
I feel that's so many Asian kids though, second generation, they come here and they rebel.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And after he did that, I was well, if he can get away with an ice cream shop, I guess my mom won't murder me if I start this like, because the Tailor, like this is like an underserved niche that before me nobody had done it. So it had, from a business, I did the business plan out, and it made more sense than the ice cream shop. Sorry if you're listening. So his ice cream shop is doing great, so it's fine. But he's got a great Instagram account. But it made more sense. So I was like, okay, well, this is viable, and this product should exist. So I had made a lot of money contracting, and then I made. You know, it's funny, when I went from like working in a boutique firm, contracting all over the world, doing stuff on the ground, to a corporate firm that had a lot of mining companies and banks and stuff as clients, my take-home pay actually went down by about 70% or 60%. But I had some money from that, and I was like, you know what? I can do this on the cheap. It was not cheap. I budgeted out, and I think my initial budget to start this company, because like, oh, I'll do it startup, lean startup style, and you know, the prototype is going to cost me, you know, $7,000 and this, and then I'll do a real guerrilla website and real guerrilla photography that'll be free and blah blah. And then, you know, obviously the cost to start this company like multiplied like every few months, and I was like, oh my god. But it is what it is. And
nothing done right is ever cheap, unfortunately.
Yeah, absolutely. And it still occupies the vast majority of my creative attention.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yep.
I love that transition from, you know, you got the adventure out of a career field that you desired, and then you needed something more kind of for your soul and for your creative mind, and just leapt at it, and that's a beautiful thing to see.
I agree.
Yeah, I think I don't know. I'm sure a lot of your listeners are probably in a similar industry, and like what I would say is, you know, kind of like love yourself, because so many people that I met in that space at that time, it's different now, like post GWAT and with all these soft guys who have left and gone private sector, but like at that time, the vast majority of people who I've met who had been working in that industry for like more than a decade were really sad. And they were sad in different ways. Some of them were addicts, whether they were addicted to adrenaline or gambling or drugs or women or whatever it was. Some of them were in it just because they were addicted to the pay, because it paid so well, and they were putting their kids through, you know, college or whatever, which is like kind of fair enough, but they weren't happy to be there.
Yeah.
And these were people that I romanticized as a teenager, right? You're like, oh wow, these like former airborne and whatever, like South African commandos and whatever. And then once you meet them, you're like, oh wow, I do not want to turn out like you.
Yeah. Oh man, that was a big wake up call. But yeah,
don't meet your heroes. But like honestly, if you fancy yourself becoming like a, you know, military adjacent dude when you grow up, quote unquote, like meet your heroes.
Yeah.
It was very much a wake up call, and it was good. Like you said, I kind of I was a war tourist. I got to shake that side out of me, and it gave me a lot of perspective as to what matters in life, and what really matters is, you know, the people you love and your happiness and all that good stuff, and making a difference where you can without that difference costing you in a way that's not acceptable for you or your loved ones.
Yeah.
That's that kind of wild, but I think that sentence very much encapsulates like being a young, warm-blooded dude, and it's such a fucking dangerous position to be in, and it's half the planet. It's like, like I think you know, me and Nathan, and we've talked about this on the show plenty of times from all sorts of different perspectives of dudes who come from all sorts of different places, and so many of us had that inclination as young men to like go and do something dangerous and adventurous, and you know, you open yourself up to be used or misled or broken, like you know, in many different ways by doing that, and it is such a hazardous path to walk, and like that's the human experience to an extent, but like just the way young men go about it, facing all those things that are so primal in us, like seek out, like war tourism and to see like hazardous parts of the world. It's incredible, but it's such a hazardous time in your life before you're like, okay, when you're mature enough to be like, oh, holy fuck, I lived through all of that. Okay, that was
This
cool.
is what I'm saying with the systems and psychology. It's all human psychology. War is an incredibly illogical and irrational undertaking. It makes absolutely no sense from a resource, economics, game theory, any perspective you really look at it. Unless it is a complete lock, going to war is really dumb. And yet, it is the oldest endeavor in humanity.
And we still can't escape it with all the intelligence and reasons not to do it.
Yeah.
We're like about to unlock quantum mechanics, and we're still at war. It is, and I understand why, when you think about that, it's nice to gravitate to ideas of traditional evil and Manichaean evil and cartoonish evil, because it is actually quite disheartening to be like, oh wow, the system is so irrevocably durable because it's based on our human psychology that hasn't changed and won't change. That like we can't get away from it.
Yeah.
Before we could even speak, we were bashing each other's heads in with rocks, and long after we were replaced by robots, they'll probably still have a lot of us in them and be blasting each other to pieces for one reason or another. It's
oh dude, you need to oh gosh, I can't say the name. Well, you can bleep it out. His name's check him out. So he used to run bleep that out too, which is the CIA's bleep that out too. And his perspective on AI, dude, he'll never come on the show, but if you could get him, and we had 2 more hours, like his perspective, his transcendental perspective on AI completely changed my perspective of where we're going, like in the next 20 years.
I'm
like,
really curious.
In a good way or a bad way? Like optimistic or pessimistic?
50-50.
Oh,
the core conceit is that when quantum mechanics is unlocked by AI, when AI understands quantum mathematics and mechanics, and then creates the gosh, I don't remember what it's called, unlocks all these different dimensionalities, etc. Like we don't even have, because we run on binary logic as human beings, essentially. We don't have the tools, like physiologically, our brains are not wired to even comprehend the potentials involved. So the best thing we can say is it's a 50-50. We have no idea what will happen.
Yeah.
Well, that's not
horrifying.
Yes, absolutely fucking horrifying. Thank you so much, Alex.
We're all gonna die.
I spent, after that call with him, I spent like 2 weeks just like drinking really nice champagne and whiskey and smoking really great cigars and being with my beautiful girlfriend, just like hanging out, doing nothing for 2 weeks because I was like, well, none of this matters anyways. So.
Oh my fucking god! Well,
you get over it. Yeah, you go through the grief cycle and you're fine.
Holy shit! Well, Alex, we've kept you for longer than we said we would. We've had you for 2.5 hours, and this happens when we have just fantastic guests, and we could keep you for another 3, but there's always another time. So just kind of want to wrap in a good place and say, thank you so much for sharing, your experiences and
long overdue,
your perspectives, and hopefully our audience goes and checks out Grayman.
We say Grayman and Company because we don't say Grayman and Company, like a Savile Row tailoring shop.
Nice. Okay, I will
like
correct.
You're right,
Grayman.
But no, thanks guys. I really appreciate it. I had a blast. It's always great chatting with you guys. And until next time.
Hell yeah, no, massively appreciate it, man. I of all the people we randomly ran into at SHOT, like you are like easily top 3 for me. Just such a pleasure to bump into you and then hear some of the wildest stories I've ever heard in a car ride to a party. But
it's because most of the guys that SHOT, they can't talk about it, and they're very good at discipline. I'm not disciplined in that regard. So.
Hey, it was our pleasure. So, Nathan, we have one more thing for Alex, don't we?
We do. A little bit of dad advice for our listeners.
As if they
advice.
As if they're looking to you with open eyes, as looking up at their father, like, please, what does the world hold for me?
Oh, terrifying. Okay.
No, funny, serious, whatever you like, man.
If people around you, the people you love, are happy, you'll be happy. It's a very Asian kind of take on it, but yeah.
Proverbial. I like it. No, it's you gotta surround yourself with success and happiness and just good people, man.
Yeah, I mean, it cuts both ways, right?
Yeah.
It's you make them happy if you can, and if you can't, and they're just not happy people, know that you're not going to be a particularly happy person.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's I don't know, why that was the first thing that came to mind, but it is. So
hey, no, if that's the first thing that comes to mind, all the better. You know, nice and authentic. But no, thank you very much, Alex, once again. Grayman and Company. We will have all of the various links in the description. Aside from Instagram and your website, is there anywhere else people should check out Grayman?
We update Instagram the most, and when I say we, I mean it's myself and one other guy who monitor it. So whenever we have anything new, we post on Instagram. We do have a newsletter. Sign up on our website, and we're meant. Our marketing consultant has told us we need to push more emails out. So I'm talking to King's College London War Studies Department because they're going to be potentially writing little fun intel blurbs in our as like content marketing in our newsletter. Cool. So they'll be fun. And yeah, but Instagram is the best place to find us.
Hell yeah. All right, well.
Excellent. Thank you for coming on. Seriously. Looking forward to doing this again. And also getting you as my own little suit sommelier.
100%. And I can actually tell you a bit more about the sommelier thing after, but have a great night. I guess this is going long enough for your listeners, so
it's all good.
We'll talk soon.
People like the long form.
Oh, they love long form. All right,
people commutes.
Yes, they do. All right, thank you everyone for listening, and okay, bye.
Okay, bye.